it right now, and then have to find out. No, they're already in the meeting. Yeah. So let me just make sure, Dan, are you able to hear us? Do you want me to text him?
I can hear you. This is George.
Okay, George, great, thank you. Okay,
This is Dan. I can hear you.
okay, terrific, thank you. I think we're up and running.
Okay.
You are.
Okay,
You know,
thank you.
no.
You can mute yourselves for now. Thank you so much. All right, thanks, bye-bye.
Okay. We good to go? Okay, I call to order the meeting of the Inland Wetlands Commission, Monday, January the 22nd, 2024 at 7:21 p.m. in the Town Hall at New Canaan and also on Zoom. And I'd just like to start by apologizing for the delay. We have temporary audio visual equipment at the moment, and it's not always as cooperative as we would like it to be. So we apologize for that. So our first item is to select a chair pro tem. Dan Stepanek is on Zoom, and he has asked that I be the chair pro tem, Angela Jameson. So could I hear a motion, please?
Hi.
I nominate you as.
Beth Sanford, thank you. Does anybody second that? All those in favor? Aye, then that's passed. And now we need to select a secretary pro tem. And I would like to nominate Dan Stepanek. Can I hear a second, please? Second. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Please would the secretary pro tem do the roll call?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dan Stepanek, and that's me. I'm here. Angela Jameson,
Present.
Beth Brunelli,
Here.
George Perkins. George, I saw you. George, can you hear us?
George, you need to unmute yourself so you can say that you're present.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, George, and welcome back. Beth.
Thank you.
I'm here.
Anthony Zillo,
Absent.
Priscilla Woke,
Present.
Katie Osley,
Absent.
Adam Ramirez,
Present.
and Sandy Redden.
Here.
Thank you.
That ends it, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Secretary Pro Tem. So I would like to ask Sandy Redden to be seated for Anthony Sillo today.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And then we have a couple of people who were not at the last meeting. I would just like to ask them to confirm that they looked at the video of the last meeting and have reviewed all the material on the website. Priscilla Wojcicki?
I did, thank you.
Thank you. And Adam Ramirez?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. I believe everybody else was present for our last meeting. So thank you very much. So the next item is to approve the agenda. Any comments? If not, could I hear a motion, please?
I'll move.
Thank you, Priscilla, seconded by
Second.
Sandy Redden. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Next item is to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of December the 18th, 2023. Does anyone have any comments on those minutes? If not, could I hear a motion, please?
I move that we approve
I'll
the.
make a motion.
Thank you, Beth Sanford. Could I hear a second, please?
A second.
Thank you, Beth Brunali. All those in favor? Aye. So the minutes are approved. Open regular meeting. So the applications that we have received and that will be scheduled for the February 26th, 2024 regular meeting are as follows. Application number IW-24-1, 39 River Wind Road, Sharon R. Perino, sediment removal and stabilization from existing 90-foot watercourse channels. And then secondly, application IW-24-2, 566 Weed Street, 566 Weed Street LLC, proposed driveway off Weed Street to access 588 Weed Street, including grading and landscaping work. Thank you. So now we need to schedule our site visit for those two properties, and we're proposing February the 7th at 8 a.m. Is everybody available for that?
I heard from some commission members, the only one who was not able to make it at this point is, I know Dan Stepanek will not be able to make it, and Beth Sanford. And a few others said they could make it. It could also be switched to the following Wednesday if that works better for most, because our meeting is actually February 26th, so we have a little more time. I just hesitate with snow and things. You never know what might be happening.
Yeah.
So,
Might be better if we've got a quorum.
To
We've
go
got a
with
healthy
7th.
quorum
I agree.
to stick with 7th of February at 8 a.m. So please mark your calendars. Okay, so now I will open the public hearing. Application number 23-24-14, 377 North Wilton Road, St. Luke's Foundation. Construct new synthetic turf field on top of proposed parking structure. Reconfigure the parking lot north of Watson Field into a corral parking area, fine grade and landscape. So we opened the public hearing at our last meeting, and we are continuing today. And the format for today's open public hearing is that we will first hear from the neighbors. Then we will ask the town engineer, Maria Coplet, to comment on the engineering of the project. And then we will move to the applicant to provide any further information, presentation, and comment on what's been heard so far. So we may be able to close the public hearing this evening. It just depends, you know, how many comments we have and how much discussion. But I would assume that we're going to need an extension until our next meeting, and I'm hopeful that the applicant will be open to that.
So we won't need an extension if you're able to close the public
Okay,
hearing.
sorry.
You'd only need an extension if the public hearing was needed to be carried
Very
over.
good,
Yep.
very good. Okay, very good. Well, we'll return to that subject if we're not able to close the public hearing. So before we start, could I just see who would, from the neighbor's side, who would like to speak during the course of this public hearing? I know we have a team led by Attorney Green, but are there other neighbors here who would wish to say something?
I may have comments, but if I could, I'd prefer to go at the end because it might just all be repetitive if the experts come with it.
Right. Well, I think, well, that certainly we can start with the Attorney Green's team, and then we'll open it up to further comments from the public. So, Attorney Green, the floor is yours.
Where would you like us to set up here?
So we can give I think this works well,
Great.
actually.
Thank you.
Now I recognize the Pierce. You guys were on Zoom last.
Yes.
We have a lot of Sarahs in this mix here, so I think you're also a Sarah, right?
Right.
Nice to match your face.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission, staff. My name is Joel Green. I practice law in Bridgeport. with the law offices of Green and Gross, it's my pleasure to appear before you this evening on behalf of Sarah and Will Pierce, who live at 729 Laurel Road, which is a property that directly abuts the property that's the subject of this St. Luke's campus. My clients have many concerns regarding this project, but specifically and immediately for purposes of the jurisdiction of this commission, my clients have just very significant concerns about the proximity of this project and specifically the artificial turf field to the wetlands, which are overseen and by this commission. I went back and I listened to, I actually watched the video of the last presentation today because I had taken a lot of notes, but I had a lot of questions, and it was interesting because it seemed that the applicant stated a lot of conclusions, but as you'll hear tonight in our presentation, there's not a lot of support for those conclusions, and there's a lot of open questions that we think will be of tremendous interest to the commission in applying your regulations and the standards that have to be met with respect to this application. Before I introduce our consultants, so I'd like to provide my clients with an opportunity to address the commission directly and express their concerns regarding the project. I don't know which of you.
I'll go first.
Thank you. And if you wouldn't mind introducing
Yeah,
yourself. for the
Absolutely.
record.
So hi, everyone. I'm Will Pierce. We're the homeowners of 729 Laurel Road. Thank you all for your time. I guess I'll just start out by saying that, we were a bit shocked and sort of saddened by the application, just given the sort of lack of information that it seems to provide. It doesn't really seem to address any of the stuff that might be the purview of the wetlands. It doesn't seem to sort of address any potential negative feedback that this project could have. Attorney Finn last session sort of mentioned that we might have some sort of weird reason for hiring an attorney. And the reality of why we hired Joel is that when we read the application, we just didn't quite understand what this really means for us and the impact to both the wetlands, our water, our property, and our neighbors. And so, I hope today for both Sarah and my benefit, as well as the commission, as well as our neighbors, we can sort of bring to light some of these issues because, we don't sort of get to do a redo for this. And so the reason why this commission's work is so important is that these are really important resources that this town has. It's part of the reason why we bought our home here, part of the reason why we spent the last 3 years designing and rebuilding our house. Like we care about this place and we're going to be here for a long time. And so we want to take care of it. And so, the goal of this work is to really try to understand in an honest and thorough way what the impacts of this may or may not be to the wetlands, and then make a really eyes wide open assessment. And so our hope here is nothing more than to really have an honest assessment of what's going on. So I just wanted to say that because our goal really is to find the truth here. Because frankly, as it sort of started, we felt very sort of devoid of information. So with that, we'll pass it on to my wife for her own remarks.
So I'm Sarah Pierce, for the record. The St. Luke's application in front of you is one of the most extraordinary proposals that has ever come before this Wetlands Commission. You could find no precedent for anything like it. Wilton struggled with a somewhat comparable issue involving astroturf runoff into the aquifers, and the entire town was involved. I didn't plan on saying this, but to Ms. Jameson's comment, I know that a number of neighbors have said to me that they wanted to log on and listen to our experts before they made their comment. So if the commission would take that into account when, I guess a lot of people told that to me sort of anecdotally, but in Wilton, when the aquifers were involved, it was put to a referendum and the voters rejected it. So if planning this garage were a class project, I feel like I've spent the last month doing Chris's homework, and we've done the work to get evidence-based answers on how this structure will affect the wetlands. From an ecological standpoint, the design is untested and unproven, which is another way of saying it's indefensible. It cannot be defended. which explains why St. Luke's has provided so little data and evidence to defend it. The materials and design go against national and international environmental trends. We were genuinely shocked that an educational institution had taken so few steps to mitigate the superheated water runoff and contamination. As we'll demonstrate here tonight, there's no question that the AstroTurf and the garage will contaminate the New Canaan wetlands. So the question now before us is, how much contamination there will be, and is that acceptable? As St. Luke's own experts attest, this design exists in urban environments, and as an urban design, the underlying assumptions rely on urban infrastructure to treat water runoff into the water systems. And even then, as Dr. Tian will show us, the chemicals involved have very serious environmental consequences. So we know communities have to weigh, public and residential benefits with environmental trade-offs, but one of the unique things about this application is that as a private institution, the enormity of the ecological effect is not, we felt it's not really balanced with any meaningful public benefit. But we know about the traffic. We also know that it's going to get worse. This discussion belongs in planning and zoning, but the Wetlands Commission should be aware that the school has been using shell companies to purchase residential properties on Deep Valley Road. It's obvious that they want to rezone and develop these properties to build kind of an upper lower campus. So if you're asking yourself, why are they pursuing such like a bonkers, like expensive, large, plan when there are a lot more normal solutions on hand, that's the right question. This garage was not designed with the wetlands in mind. It was not proposed for the benefit of the neighborhood. St. Luke's is obsessed with this design for their own reasons. They've long outgrown their space, and the wetlands shouldn't be sacrificed to solve for the poor long-term planning of the St. Luke's Board of Trustees. I'd like to draw special attention to this letter Dr. Sarah Evans submitted to you, attesting that Mount Sinai's ICANN School of Medicine, the Children's Environmental Health Department, in no uncertain terms opposes the use of synthetic turf. We don't blame the school for putting in a turf field 2 decades ago. At the time, the thinking was that this material was a benign solution, but the science has changed and we now know better. So, Mount Sinai has invested considerable resources in educating policymakers on this issue. And so I encourage you to look at her citations, which show that regulatory bodies are moving away, not towards crumb rubber. There's also momentum in the Connecticut legislature about banning this material. So that could provide context on why, it's being put right now, why the school seems quite eager to get this project going at this moment now quickly. Before they can prove that it won't be, that it's safe for the wetlands. As we've all read, microplastics are at every level of the food chain and in every organ of the human body, including placentas. So, the state recommends that kids wash their hands and equipment after playing on AstroTurf, but the wetlands don't have hands and they're supposed to be doing the washing. So, last and most importantly, the contaminants that we're discussing here tonight, they're not going to end up in Christopher Raza's drinking water. He's driving home to Westport where crumb rubber is banned. By the time this thing starts causing real problems, when we start finding unacceptable levels of PFAS chemicals in our wetlands and our drinking water, Chris will be long gone, his kids will have graduated, and the people in this room are gonna be dealing with that mess. So those are that.
So just from a sort of a higher level view, when I looked at the video today and reviewed my notes from the last hearing, that sort of the larger piece of this is that the applicant's proposing to basically put a 1 to 2 acre tray up in the air that is filled with crumb rubber that will be exposed and receive obviously stormwater from rain and snow events. And we will show that let me just back up. A point of discussion is sort of the applicability of the 2004 deep stormwater manual and its applicability to the plan. And frequently when I attend hearings like this and we point out non-compliance with the manual, with the stormwater manual, it's always pointed out that it's kind of advisory. And a lot of times that opposing counsel will say, well, those are just guidelines. They're not hard rules. But I note in this instance that, first of all, Maria Coplet in her initial notes indicated that the plan must be compliant with the stormwater manual. I note that the applicant has represented in several places that the plan was fully compliant with the stormwater manual. And we will point out tonight the ways in which it is in fact not compliant with the stormwater manual and doesn't treat what we will show are compounds and contaminants that are coming, that will come off this field, that will be discharged by the field. I was struck by the fact that the applicant spent time talking about the need for this because their turf field right now is settling in places. The applicant talked about, there was some presentation made on where the columns will be made to support the deck. And yet the field is settling in some places. And it occurs to me that if you have, and when you look at the soil testing and the soil results, and the applicant suggested that the reason the field is settling is because there's organic material in the ground that's decomposing. And as a result, the ground is settling where that organic material, trees, logs, stumps, whatever went in there, is decomposing, that is what is causing the settling of the field. And it occurred to me that that would similarly cause the settling of a parking lot that's basically sitting under the deck. And the applicant hasn't really described or identified in a meaningful way the degree to which they're going to have to excavate the area under the existing field. The applicant hasn't described for you the method that will be used to remove the field. And you did receive some literature that talked about old and decomposing fields and that they shed plastic material and that they shed and that the fibers become brittle. And when these turf fields are removed and disturbed, they shed plastic. And also the crumb rubber has to be excavated. So there was no real protocol described for the purposes of this commission on how that work was going to be done. The applicant dug a total of 9 test holes. There are 2 reports in your materials that talk about. Initially, there were 4 borings done that showed that there's organic material in the ground. Some of it is 15 or 17 feet under the ground, as I recall in one of the test results, but Mr. Trinkus can speak to that. But the applicant hasn't even really defined for you the level of excavation that's going to have to occur on the site, how much soil. If you don't know how much soil is being excavated, and if this is kind of an exploratory job as you go, well, I would suggest that this commission can't really make the findings it needs to make until you have some metric on how much soil is coming out. If and in terms of stockpile area and in terms of other construction issues. So, my point is that even for me, and I'm not an engineer, I'm just a lawyer, but even when I read this, I think that there's quite a bit of missing information, and we'll talk about the lack of compliance with the manual. So tonight you'll hear from 4 experts, and they include Steve Trinkus of Trinkus Engineering, who will talk about some of the engineering aspects. You hear from Dr. Zhenyu Tian, who's an assistant professor at Northeastern University and has experience dealing with the contaminants that are released from rubber. You'll hear from Jim McManus, who is a wetland soil scientist, and you'll hear from George Logan of Lima Environmental, who is an environmental scientist, and we will provide comments as well. So maybe what we can do is start with Steve Trinkus and aside.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Stephen Trinkus. I'm a professional engineer from Southbury, Connecticut. My firm is Trinkus Engineering, and I've been licensed since 1988 here in Connecticut.
Mr. Trinkus, and by the way, all of the consultants, we have provided CVs and resumes. They are in the record, but I would ask you to just briefly, for the benefit of the commission and the public, just briefly state your education, training, and experience. So,
I have a Bachelor of Science in Forestry from the University of New Hampshire, graduated in 1980. Based on working for engineers, I passed both the engineering training exam and professional licensing exams based on experience. And then I've been on my own. I was part-time in 88, 89, and then fully on my own since 1990. I do all land use projects. I also have a lot of expertise in low impact development, which is a focus on runoff volumes and water quality issues of development and the adverse impacts to our environment, particularly the aquatic environment. I reviewed and submitted 2 letters. One is December 1st of 23, and one is January 16th of 24. And I'm just going to hit some of the high points of both. As Attorney Green pointed out, you know, it's been stated by the applicant, the existing field is settling, and we know we have borings with variable amounts of unsuitable material. You're going to put a parking garage, basically holding up this field. It's all a concrete deck. It's supported by columns. And we don't know, you know, there's only borings in a certain portion of the site and not the entire area. So how much excavation is going to have to occur here to remove unsuitable material? Because if the field is settling, B, the parking garage underneath, and so would the columns supporting the turf field also settle unless you remove all the unsuitable material and replace it with structural fill. So that brings up, you know, how many truckloads of stuff are going to have to go off the site, how many are going to have to come back in. And again, now you've got a, you know, a lot more site disturbance than represented by the applicant. Once this project if it gets constructed, I know there's been a discussion on, you know, whether the water quality volume, which is a requirement under the DEP manual to treat the water from 1 inch of rain on an impervious surface. Artificial turf fields are considered impervious surfaces because they don't drain into the ground. They have under drain systems, so there is no infiltration. So the water quality volume has to be calculated on the for the turf field because that is what's exposed to the rainfall. The underneath where the cars are is not exposed to it. However, you've got, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, a couple hundred cars are under this garage. And they're going to be in and out during the winter, during summer, other times of the year where it's raining. So you're going to have wet conditions on these cars. And so the movement of the cars, you're going to get metals from the brakes, and you're going to get an occasional drip of oil. You know, I'm not saying all these cars leak oil, but, you know, it takes a little thumbnail size, but times a couple hundred cars, you know, can add up. So in my professional opinion, while the water quality volume for the turf field is one standard, for the parking garage, and this is a little different than Maria, your town engineer, has asked the applicant, is I think you take the entire area of the parking garage with a ½ inch of rain, not 1 inch of rain, because it is basically protected from, you know, the atmosphere with the turf field. But once you figure out these numbers, you also have to treat the water, and that's not being done. The turf field is directed to an underground Cultec system. If you were to stand at the school looking at the field towards the wetlands to the left of it. And basically the under drains will come down from the field and go to an underground Cultec system. There's an outlet structure to detain the water and let it go. But there's no treatment of the water. And because it is exposed to the air, and you'll hear from other experts, but turf fields do generate pollutants. You know, the crumb rubber that's used in them, you know, as kids run up and down them in spikes, that crumb rubber gets ground up to more of a rubber powder, and the powder can move easily in the water. When it does, you can get heavy metals being released from that. You also have atmospheric deposition of nitrogen and phosphorus, simply lands on the field and then gets washed off. So you have to have treatment for that. There is none going to the north side. Now, the parking garage itself goes to the opposite direction and goes through a oil grit separator, which is basically a modified septic tank. While that can trap coarse sediments, it doesn't do very much for fine sediments. It may trap some oils and grease, but not much more than a standard catch basin with a hooded outlet. Then that is, again, going to a smaller detention system and then being discharged to the top of the slope. So in both cases, there's inadequate treatment. We also don't know, because of the fill on the site, whether, what the soil is where these systems are going to be. Do you have high groundwater in these areas? Because the systems have to have a 3-foot separation between the bottom of the system and seasonal groundwater, and we have no evidence to support a claim either way for both of those systems. So that's another major problem. The parking lot that's further, I guess, towards the main road is going to be reconfigured to provide, I guess, a little bit better traffic movement, and the water is going to be directed to, according to the applicant, a perimeter sand filter. Well, the detail shown on the applicant's plan is not a perimeter sand filter. In my January 16th letter, you'll see the perimeter and what they call Delaware sand filter. This is straight out of the DEP 2004 Stormwater Quality Manual. And basically, this type of sand filter is a sand filter in a concrete box. It is not an infiltration practice. You have a pre-treatment cell, which is designed to trap coarse sediments. The water fills up, goes over a weir, and then goes down to a bed of sand to an underdrain and then gets discharged. And the treatment is within the sand. So the applicant's detail, which now has been added to the plans, is not a Delaware sand filter. You've got to follow what's in the Connecticut manual for treatment. And it requires 25% pre-treatment of the water quality volume. The applicant's plan does not provide that. They claim they're going to have a stone diaphragm. Well, that's not treating 25% of the water quality volume in any shape or form. So again, we also have for the sand filter, they're claiming a 10-inch per hour infiltration rate. Well, there's no evidence, there's no infiltration tests. So you can't claim a 10-inch per hour rate based on NRCS soil or what you think the geotechnical consultant may give you an opinion on. You've got to do double ring infiltration testing, and the testing has to be done, if it is an infiltration practice, at or below the bottom of the system, because that's a soil layer that is going to receive the water. Doing an infiltration test at the ground surface when the bottom of the filter is 4 or 5 feet below grade is meaningless. It doesn't tell you anything. So we just don't have enough information on how well the stormwater system will work in any event. There's inadequate data, but there's inadequate treatment of the pollutants that are going to be generated from this site. And the underground, I should say underfield parking, you are going to have pollutant loads there. You've got cars moving out of there, probably with turf. One of the benefits, according to the people who have athletic programs, of a turf field is you can use it all the time. It's not like a grass field that when it rains, it's pretty much unusable until, it dries out. But with turf fields, you can play on these fields, in a pouring rainstorm, snow, whatever. We've seen that, in the NFL lately. But the problem is, you're going to have a lot more traffic on this site than you normally would. And therefore, the more traffic, the more pollutant loads are generated by it. So you've got to have a robust treatment system prior to discharging into the wetlands. And that's really the biggest issue here, is you have inadequate treatment of these pollutants that are going to, get discharged. The professor from Northeastern will give you more elaboration on the fields themselves, but I know from the fact that the crumb rubber, when it gets chewed up, can release heavy metals, which are a serious, aquatic concern. Thank you.
So if I may just ask a few questions of the witness for the benefit of the commission.
Certainly.
So is it possible to have the site plan shown that shows the galleries? The two entrances? Not able to do that.
Not for me to do that.
So I can do that on my.
If you have it in your presentation slides, did you have in your presentation slides?
We'll try to do
Yeah,
this.
I don't project any of the material. That's for you. Yeah, we
Okay.
get to do.
Okay. Well, let's try to. So can you just describe the system that is shown by the applicant, as I understand it, and I'm referring to the elevated field as basically a tray, and I referred to that in my initial remarks. And can you describe how the system is configured now for receiving the stormwater from the field?
The current field.
No,
No, the proposed field. the proposed field, artificial turf fields typically have the field there, there's a gravel layer underneath, and then there are under drains generally at the perimeter of the field that convey the water to a stormwater management system. I believe based on the plan, this field will have a slight slope from the school side towards the wetlands, and there's an under drain collection system on that edge that's cantilevered out towards the wetlands, and then that water is brought down via pipes and goes to the larger detention system.
So as I understand it, am I correct that underneath the field itself, in the field itself, there's the plastic turf fibers, and in between those fibers, it's filled with from rubber, but beneath that, there's a membrane, and beneath that is a course of stone or 2 courses of stone, as I recall it. And
Yeah.
then at some point, there's an impermeable surface, and the water that falls on the field drains to the west towards, or on both sides of the field.
Actually, I think it all goes just towards the wetlands.
Okay, and then it is received along the perimeter of the field, and it is piped to the south along the side of the field and along the end of the field, down and then into an underground detention system.
Yeah, the description of the field is correct. You have, an impermeable liner on top of the concrete of the parking garage. You have gravel layers, and then you have, and it can be 1 or 2 different layers. Then there's generally a membrane layer that's not impermeable. And then you've got your turf field with the chrome rubber as your playing surface. So in this case, the water does go towards the wetland side. There is a drainage system, and I believe in multiple locations, it drops down to the parking garage surface and then is directed towards the underground detention system.
And there's 2 separate systems. There's
Correct.
one for the field and one for the parking lot.
Correct.
And in terms of treatment of the water that is coming off the field, it is directed into these underground galleries. And some of it permeates through the ground, is that?
Well, we don't know that. I think that may be partially part of the intent, but you have no soil data to know whether it will actually infiltrate. But you also have to treat water under the DEP manual. 25% of the water quality volume has to be treated if you're going to an infiltration practice, because otherwise you're basically putting water with pollutants right back into the ground, and that's not desirable. So you need to clean up the water before you infiltrate it. But in this case, we don't know what the soils are, whether they will infiltrate, what they consist of. And if they're fill material, they're not going to do much of anything.
And I am looking at the revision to the stormwater management report, which is dated January 8th, which was submitted to the commission. And I note that fortunately, I can't identify the page number, but there's a diagram that's in orange and red that shows where the test borings are shown on the field. And I apologize to the commission, but it is this document, and it shows where the test borings, the initial 4 test borings, which are B1 through 4, and then the subsequent test borings. Can you comment on the quantity and location of the test borings in your opinion?
Yeah, for structural design, especially when you're dealing with unknown soil conditions or you are hitting fill material, you generally want to do them at 50-foot intervals, both in a north, south, east, west axis, or perhaps even 25-foot, depending on what you find. But you start out at a 50-foot interval, basically a grid in both directions. And if you find that the soils are relatively consistent, then that may be adequate. If there's a wide range of differences in the depth of the fill, then you're going to want to do holes in between to figure out really what's going on so that you can develop, a structural plan. For a building I did years ago in a project in Fairfield, it was a formerly filled wetlands, probably 50, 60 feet of fill from back in the 1960s. And, we initially did 3 or 4 borings to just get an idea of the fill. But from there, they did borings every 15 feet around the perimeter of the building and through the building in order to design the structural foundation for it. And that was only, that was a small apartment building, a lot smaller than this site. So again, 50-foot grid would be the starting point, and then you go beyond that if you need to.
Now, I note that, bear with me for one moment. In test boring B1, which was apparently done initially where the field was settling, I note that there is trace wood and plastic fill and that's at a depth of 12 feet.
Yeah, they're hitting it at 12 feet, going down to 15.5 feet.
And as an engineer, what does that mean in terms of what would need to be done on the site?
You would want to dig out that entire layer. And that's the reason you need more frequent borings, is to establish the extent of the fill material and the variable depth of it. Once you do the borings, what we used to do prior to AutoCAD was we would plot cross sections, and you would draw, the depths of suitable and unsuitable material, and then figure out the volumes by longhand. But in this case, that layer would all come out. That's not structural fill, and you're asking to support, columns to support a turf field and a concrete deck. So you've got to have it down to bearing material that will support it.
And you made a comment, and going back to the stormwater treatment, you made a comment earlier, and it's in your supplemental report, I believe, the diagram. Can you just discuss the diagram in your supplemental report that highlights how the proposed system does not meet the standard in the stormwater manual?
The proposed design, the detail provided by the applicant has basically a trench with a lot of crushed stone and the sand at the bottom. That's not a sand filter. The sand filter is sand up to the surface. And the Delaware one, or what they call a perimeter sand filter, is basically, it's in a box. That's how it's meant to be. It's meant to be used along parking areas. It's not an infiltrative practice, but it is solely a treatment practice. But you have a sediment chamber to trap, coarse sediment, maybe a little woody debris, and then the ponding, the water surface goes over the weir and then filters through the sand, and that's where the pollutant renovation occurs. And then there's an under drain which discharges to a catch basin, to an outlet.
Can you just explain that? I'm sorry, in a little bit more granular way. We discussed
Okay.
it on Friday, but just for the benefit of the commission, so it's basically a trench or a box.
The Delaware sand filter it's in a box. It's not an infiltrative capacity. There are other types of sand filters that are designed without a bottom to fully infiltrate, but a Delaware one is basically, think of it as a very elongated concrete septic tank with two main compartments. One is this pre-treatment that holds 25% of the water quality volume, and the balance of it is the treatment area. There's also a calculation under the DEP manual sizing the surface area of the sand, and that has not been done. So based on your flows coming in, you've got to have so many square feet of surface area to provide treatment, and we don't have that calculation, but that's a requirement for a Delaware sand filter.
So what you're saying then is that in this chamber, there's essentially a wall down the middle of this concrete box that separates the two.
Yeah, to the
parts of the chamber.
pre-treatment to the treatment,
And
yes.
on one side of the wall, and this is in Mr. Trinkus's report, there's this box, a concrete box, and it has a wall in the middle of it.
Correct.
And the water enters this chamber and fills up to the level of the wall.
Correct, and sediment will settle out in that, and then basically
25% of the water volume that is predicted to be received has to be able to be
Contained.
stored on that side.
correct.
And then the water pours over the wall in the middle into sandy material,
Into basically pure sand.
the pure sand. And what happens?
It filters through the sand and then hits an under drain pipe at the bottom and then
it's
goes,
discharged. Yeah.
correct, and goes discharge. And the pollutant removal occurs within the sand itself.
And that sand is periodically changed.
Well, generally the surface is, because the surface you'll get fine sediment built up on the surface, which will slow the infiltration rate down. And again, depends on, the amount of fine sediment coming into your system. Generally, annually, you go in and look at it. And as long as it's infiltrating to the design rate, it's fine. But if it starts slowing down where the ponding is occurring, 12, 24 hours after a rainstorm, then you've got enough fines built up that you just need to go in, scrape it off, replace it with clean sand.
And at the bottom of that sandbox, there's a discharge pipe, correct?
Correct.
And that discharges to the wetland?
Well, to a catch basin or a wetland, it goes out to daylight, you're discharging the water.
And in this
That point.
instance, it discharges to the west. Towards the
Correct.
wetland.
Correct.
And you met with Dr. Tien and you're aware, and Mr. Logan, and you're aware of some of the compounds and contaminants that come out of turf fields, and you're aware that they are not treated adequately by the design that the applicant has used.
That's correct. Also, on the third page of the January 16th letter are links to chemicals and compounds that come off turf fields. They are not clean. They're not benign. They may look it, but they're not.
And in terms of your experience with the parking garage, and that there's a separate system that similarly has underground detention for water running out of the parking garage.
Correct.
And how do pollutants get flushed out of the parking garage where it's covered by the field?
Well, you're gonna have, snow melt off your car like this time of year. During the spring, if it's rainy, your cars are wet, you're gonna drip water like happens in everybody's garage, I'm sure right now. I mean, there's not a lot of snow on the ground, but yet I've got little puddles in my garage. And generally the parking garage it does have some drains in it, so it will slope, the water will run to the drains within the garage itself that are then conveyed out to the detention system on the smaller side.
Okay, so in summary, then, it's your testimony then that there's a lot of question in terms of the material under the present field that isn't included in the application,
Correct.
and the treatment system that is inadequate in your opinion and does not meet the standards in the stormwater manual.
That is correct.
I don't know if the commission has questions for Mr. Jones.
Do we have any questions at this time?
This is Commissioner Brindley. You were talking with regards to the sand filter, the Delaware sand, that little box.
Yeah.
Is there only one type of sand filter?
No, there's actually several in the DEP manual.
Okay, so why, forgive me, I'm not an engineer. Why are you focused on the Delaware sand filter?
That's
as
what the
opposed-
applicant, the perimeter sand filter is also known as a Delaware sand filter.
Okay,
And that's what they're calling out on their plan as a perimeter sand filter.
okay, so then the two terms are.
Yeah, they're interchangeable, yeah. The perimeter sand filter was developed in Delaware, hence its nickname.
Okay. In terms of the top tray, the field, I'm understanding it's your position that the water coming off of that layer should be treated.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that the same for grass fields that are sprayed with chemicals?
If they're close to a wetland, yes. If you had a turf field that though was, 100 feet from any wetland and it was generally flat around it, you're not going to get a lot of runoff in the first place. So any fertilizer, pesticides, should be used in the minimal amount that they need. But when you have a large enough vegetated buffer around a field, like even other fields, that will be attenuated there. But if you had a grass field here, generally they have a crown to them. They generally, again, pitch to both sides. If you were close to wetlands, you'd likely have a surface drain on both sides of that field that would collect that water and direct it to a discharge point, but not directly to the wetland, so it could be treated. It's only when you have excessive fertilizers and or pesticides that it becomes a concern. If you put down, I'll use an example, a Home Depot perspective, for our lawns. If it says 10 pounds per 1,000 square feet. If you put fertilizer down at that rate, your lawn will absorb it because that's designed to absorb it. But if you decide, I want a greener lawn, and I'm gonna put 20 pounds down per 1,000 square feet, now you're gonna have a fertilizer discharge because your lawn cannot absorb all of those nutrients that are in the fertilizer. So if you over fertilize or you put more pesticides on, yes, it's gonna run off. But as long as there's not a direct discharge to a wetlands, it'll likely get attenuated in other vegetated areas on turf fields. I know, I grew up in Reading with Joe Barlow, and I know their prime football field and soccer field are both grass. They're not artificial turf fields, but they have 100 feet of woods before you get to a wetland, and it's literally level for 50, 60 feet around the field. So anything that might run off is just, it doesn't go anywhere,
Mhm.
so.
For the record, this is Angela Jameson. Mr. Trinkhouse, could you comment on the difference in quality of the treatment of stormwater currently, given the old and fast disintegrating artificial turf versus the proposed new artificial turf?
Well, you'd expect the same amount of pollutants to be coming off both fields because they're both exposed to the atmosphere. If they both have crumb rubber, you're having that. I don't know how the water right now is directed off the existing turf field, you know, where if they have under drains on one side or both sides. But it's a concern. It would even be a concern today.
So do you have any insight into the degree of crumb rubber and other pollutants in the wetlands currently with the current field versus what you expect there will be with the proposed new artificial turf?
I have not been on the site or in the wetlands, so I really can't comment on anything that might be in there. I can speak from having a turf field in Southbury where I live, that the track around it tends to get a lot of the finely ground rubber out on it, just from people running on it. So the material can be migratory.
So just to follow up, we were told at the last meeting by the applicant that stormwater treatment systems being proposed are a significant improvement over the now very aged systems that are in place. Do you have any comments on that assertion?
There may be no treatment now for the existing field, but quite honestly, the design doesn't provide any treatment either. It provides detention, but it does not provide treatment. So there is no positive benefit of treating water now that is not being treated.
Thank you. Do either of the commission members on Zoom have any questions they'd like to ask?
Yeah, Angela, this is Dan Stepanek. I'd like to ask Sarah Pierce. She made a comment that there are normal solutions at hand that I'm assuming that would work better than this type of garage, okay? And as a commission, we're always looking for alternatives. Sarah, could you expand on that a little bit, or maybe Will, you could expand on that?
I would love to expand on that.
Okay.
I've been told I should only talk about wetlands here. But there are, you know, the most simple answer, I don't know, I don't want to be a bad parent.
Well, you're right.
Yeah, like the most normal solution is like, frankly, like St. Luke's has grades 5 through 12 on this, you know, campus, and they've had that for a long time. They're grown in capacity. They're a great school, and like they're getting better and they're growing, and they've outgrown this campus, and we understand why they want to get bigger. But we're not the first community to deal with a small residential campus that has outgrown its pot. And so, you know, Brunswick, Greenwich Academy, like, you know, a lot of these schools, they go through this natural process of there's an upper and lower campus that are separated, and that tends to meet everybody's needs. And so I've been told that should be planning and zoning, but because you asked me.
Yeah, I might just add that, yeah, the reality of, many of these schools that were originally zoned in the forties and fifties and sixties, and this town that we've lived in for a short period of time, some for long, is towns have changed. And so what fit in the fifties and sixties doesn't necessarily fit today. And so the challenge that the school is facing is not one that is the first of a school in Fairfield to face, right? These schools have in heightened demand over the last 50 years as the population in these neighborhoods have expanded and the quality of education that these schools provided has increased. So we are actually very supportive of St. Luke's, whether they admit it or not, mission of providing a quality education to more students. But we think, like other schools, it can't continue to happen on the same footprint that made sense in the 50s. So that when we talk about sort of normal solutions, there are many other schools in Fairfield County that have dual campuses because their original acreage doesn't support this area. And some of this, to Sarah's point, is more planning and zoning, but there has to be an exception for this specific plan because this is now going to be more square footage of roof or something than the acreage. Like there are already bounds within their property that would otherwise prohibit this development. So they are reaching without the bounds of
I
their.
would just jump in, and I think that the chair asked a great question. But at the end of the day, your regulations require that it's the applicant that propose feasible and prudent alternatives to the activity that's proposed that would have less impact. And
Right.
while the applicant gave it just and when I listened to it today, the least lip service on that, they didn't present an alternate plan for the commission. They really didn't demonstrate why the rest of the site couldn't be used for the development of another field. And they certainly didn't provide a drawing or any documentation that said this is the last alternative that they have, and asked the commission to bear that in mind when looking at the plan. So the burden is on the applicant to satisfy the regulations, but I think it's a great question.
All right, thank you.
So if there are no more questions from, oh, please.
Sorry, Commissioner Bernelli put it up it again. This is a question for Attorney Green. In your remarks, you were talking about the 2004 manual, and there was some discussion about whether it's advisory or whether it's required. In your opinion, are the what's specified in that manual, is every item specified in that manual a requirement? Or is the various requirements advisory in the sense that you can be compliant with the manual if you're following the spirit, not spirit, but you are hitting a lot of the points in the manual? Or if it's more of an engineering question, I'm sorry, I don't know where
I can answer that better. I'm much more familiar.
Okay, that's fine.
When DEP developed the manual, it came out in 2004. It was a draft in 2002. And the whole purpose of it was to get design engineers like myself to begin to focus on addressing water quality and runoff volume. Prior to that time, many towns had peak grade attenuation, as New Canaan does. And the problem with peak rate attenuation is it led to a whole bunch of unintended problems. And the opening paragraph in the manual says this is a guidance document. It's designed to supplement rather than supplant professional judgment. That's the exact language. However, when you're addressing water quality, if you're going to design a sand filter, you're going to design a wet pond, there are components to all of these treatment systems that you have to put into your design in order to get the water quality benefit out of it. The water quality volume, when you're designing these systems, that's the volume you have to treat. So it's, there are standards in there that if you're going to address water quality, you have to provide water quality volume. You have to design the practice per the requirements in the manual, separations of groundwater, pre-treatment, et cetera, in order to claim the water quality benefit out of it. And in many cases, I've had engineers kind of take a position, well, it's a guidance document, I don't have to follow it. And my answer is very simple. Then you prove to me with real world monitoring data that your concept will address the water quality. How will it reduce the pollutants? Prove it to me and I'll accept it. If not, you have to follow the manual. That's the standard I have.
Well,
So
Okay, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. That's your standard. What's the standard of the state of Connecticut?
The standard state of Connecticut to address water quality is you need to follow the design specifications within that manual. That's the whole purpose of it.
So the standard of the state of Connecticut is all those guidelines are mandatory requirements to be followed in all
To
cases.
address water quality and runoff volumes, yes.
So every project in the state of Connecticut is expected to comply with every single guidance in there.
Where it's applicable to your particular project, yes.
And I note that in the report to the commission by Maria Coplet dated December 4, 2023, under drainage summary report comments, she states, given the size and scope of the project, including the area of the limit of disturbance, adherence to the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protections, and I think the 2004 Stormwater Quality Manual is required. So-
Okay, my question then would be, Attorney Finn points out language, which, sorry, I don't have it at my fingertips, in there about, I'm sorry, I'm terribly paraphrasing, but how it's advisory, and it's not to replace sound professional judgment. Again, sorry, I'm paraphrasing.
Well, no,
Um,
you're actually pretty much right on point, but the issue is, quite honestly, is a lot of engineers, you know, are not knowledgeable about how to address water quality.
Mhm.
And therefore you need to follow the manual.
Mhm.
I happen to come into low impact development by going to a lot of workshops in the mid-90s and early 2000s when it was in the infancy,
Mhm.
and learn kind of from the ground up. And, you know, I go to LID conferences, I've presented at many of them. And this is where you learn from the researchers that are monitoring these practices in the field. As an example, for a bioretention system or rain garden, which you've probably heard that either term, you know, there's a typical soil media we use. It's mostly sand. It works very well. But there's an older one from Prince George's County that has 20 to 30% topsoil. Many engineers still put that on the plan, and the system fails because the clay content in the topsoil is so high, it clogs the system. So again, if you want to use something different, you've got, in my professional opinion, you need to provide evidence that your alternative versus the manual is going to work.
Mhm.
You just can't say, oh, I'm doing a rain garden, I'm using this media, and it's all going to work great. It doesn't work that way. You've got to prove it because there's a lot of missing information out in the world. But like I said, if you're doing, you know, a constructed wetland system, there's a high marsh, a low marsh component to it. There's certain percentages. You've got to meet that because in order to claim water quality benefits, you have to have all these different aspects incorporated in your design. If you don't put the high and low marsh in and you basically do a big open water pond, you're not going to get the water quality benefit as you would for a marsh.
But just to put a point on this and land this here on this project, how does the treatment proposed by the applicant fail? Without even looking at the stormwater quality manual, what is the problem?
There is no treatment of the turf field runoff. That's statement one. Statement two is there is inadequate treatment through an oil grit separator for the parking garage, you know, water. And then the outside parking lot going to a perimeter sand filter is not designed in accordance with the manual. And it has not been proven that it will work as intended. They claim an infiltration rate, but they have no soil test data or infiltration data to prove that. And in my opinion, reviewing it, it's like, if you don't have data, you know, you can say what you want, but if you don't have data to prove that it's going to work, then the assumption is it doesn't work.
And that is specifically how fast the water is percolating through the soil at
Correct.
various points under this field. That is
Well, the
missing
sand filter, yeah,
the sand filter.
correct, yeah.
Now, with respect to the turf field, we were provided with portions of the 2010 final report on artificial turf fields done by Deep.
Going to get to that.
That report mentions a potential risk to aquatic life, and it makes a suggestion that the water be treated. was that suggestion ever incorporated into the 2004 manual?
No, turf fields really came about after that manual came about.
So,
And there's still, and there's gonna be other people talking about the turf field that are smarter than I am in that particular field. But the impacts of turf fields has been something that's come about relatively recently, in my professional opinion. That everybody thought they were great, you know, and then you see these, I mean, some of the unintended consequences was how hot these fields get on a Saturday afternoon because of the crumb rubber. I mean, these fields could be 120 degrees and you've got high school kids playing on them. You know, because it's all plastic, if you fall and you slide, you know, you get serious rug burns and kids have gotten staph infections from the fields. So there's a lot of issues that unfortunately nobody knew in the beginning, but you know, come out from experiences.
So just to get to the punchline here, we are going to show, and we are going to offer testimony tonight for the commission that there are compounds and contaminants released by crumb rubber. And you have testimony, we're going to produce this testimony and other testimony that the system that is in place does not treat the compounds coming off. Now, the applicant in their presentation said, I'm quoting, for example, Mr. Kenny's conclusions, and I listened to it twice for that part. He said that he talked about reducing the pollutant load, that they're installing a new stormwater system that, and he was encouraged by the fact that the parking lot is under the deck, so it's less exposed to rain. And he talked about two components. But in terms of the field, he said the new stormwater system, that they're installing a new stormwater system to collect and treat stormwater according to current standards, is what he said. And use that as a basis for his conclusion that there would be no impact on the wetlands. The applicant did not address at all this issue involving the crumb rubber fill. They made conclusory statements about the safety of crumb rubber fill and offered no science on it at all, and nothing upon which this commission can make a finding that there's no impact on the wetland. But I'll fill this in with our expert.
I had a follow-up question. So we have the 2004 manual. We have this final report that was afterwards, which you're mentioning in the timeline. That information kind of came to light subsequent to the 2004 manual. So is there anything in the 2004 manual that says runoff coming off of a turf field needs to be treated?
So my reading of the manual, I don't think they mentioned turf fields at all, quite honestly. I don't think it was even on their radar back then when they wrote it. Again, it was a draft manual in 2002, so we're going back longer. So they didn't even touch on that.
It is being rewritten now.
Well, I appreciate that, but the Attorney Finn is based upon their information. And I apologize if I am you can correct me if I am missing the point on what you're saying. But you know, it seems that the applicant's position is there is no current standard in Connecticut that requires that water to be treated.
Well, with all due respect to the applicant, my professional opinion, there is. Under a professional engineering license in Connecticut, my obligation is to design systems that don't adversely affect public health, safety, welfare. And irregardless of what codes, rules may exist, I have to do whatever I need to address that concern. As an analogy, I did a talk for an engineering firm in New Jersey, a national firm, about ground-mounted solar. In New Jersey, a legislature codified in state law that ground-mounted solar panels are pervious. Well, if you stand under a solar panel in the rain, you're going to stay dry. And what I said to these engineers, because they're not designing stormwater for these systems, I said, again, it doesn't matter what the rule says. You've got to, this is the obligation you have to meet. And years ago, actually in '88, when I was first licensed, Frank Schaub, the former director of the state health department, at a seminar said the health code is a minimum. You as engineers are the experts. If you need to go beyond the health code, that's your prerogative and your right to do so. So we answer to, quite honestly, a higher level of responsibility. Forget the rules. We have to do what's right for public health, safety, welfare.
I think this is a great discussion, and I think this is important, and I really appreciate your questions. I have to point to your regulations, which say that in order to grant the permit, you have to assess impacts of the proposed activity on wetlands and water courses, and the availability of safeguards and measures which would mitigate the impact in any aspect. So at the end of the day, the burden is on the applicant, and I know I keep going back to that, but I appreciate the questions, and we will address them with our other experts. Well, and Mr. Trinkus will stay if you have, he'll be here, so if you have further questions, we're happy to answer.
Madam Chairman, point of order, if I would like to ask Mr. Trinkus just a few questions at this juncture. This is Attorney Finn for the record.
This is Angela Jameson. I think we could take a couple of very brief questions, but I don't want to railroad the presentation that Attorney Green's team is going to provide, and we've only had one presentation so far.
Understood, and these are very broad brush questions. So, but if I may, I think there's 2 or 3 questions.
Yes, and please stand close to the, well, actually, you are close to that blue,
Yeah,
the blue light.
Is this okay here?
Yes,
Yeah. These ones
Kathleen?
don't mean anything, just these guys pick up everything. I think you're good.
I think you're good.
Mr. Trinkus, were you retained by the Pierces for this matter or by Attorney Green?
I was retained by the Pierces through Attorney Green.
So your first contact was from Attorney Green, is that correct?
Correct.
And you've done a lot of opposition work for Attorney Green, haven't you?
Yes, I have, and for many other attorneys.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
There are technical questions on the presentation. I think that's appropriate, but if this is a matter of cross-examining or discrediting Mr. Trinkus.
Well, I think what we can do is take a couple of questions, Attorney Finn, and you've had 2 or 3 already.
I think I've had 2. I'm counting.
So
but
a couple
but-
is 2, but I think that could be stretched to 3.
Thank you. So, but you have, and so you have often opposed applicants' engineers' opinions through Attorney Green. Is that fair?
And many other attorneys, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to say something.
Please,
St. Luke's.
could you
Yeah,
just
sorry.
remind everybody Sarah Pierce?
Sarah Pierce. I'd like to say something. These kids deserve a better field than they've got. And I told Mary Carter at the beginning of this process that we wanted to help them fix their field. So if they want to make a normal field of any kind, we're here and the opposition will disappear. We are not against St. Luke's doing anything to their field. Like, we understand these kids need a field.
Thank you for the clarification. I suggest now that we go back to the presentations of Attorney
Well, I would
Green's
just
team.
respond by saying that, asking Mr. Trinkus, do you also represent applicants in support of the project?
Many, many times, yes.
And in terms of your practice, are you generally more on the applicant side or, for example, on opposing project?
Percentage wise, way more on the applicant side. I've done land development work for close to 40 years.
And it's no secret that my area, to Mr. Finn, that my area of practice is in opposition to land use matters. So certainly Mr. Trinkus's work with me would be in opposition. So I just wanted to put that in. And I thank you for your patience on this. But Mr. Trinkus will be here. You have engineering questions, so certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Attorney Green, are we moving on to the next
We
presentation?
are. And I'd like to call Dr. Zhenyu Tian, and he is on Zoom. Good evening, Dr. Tian.
Oh, hello. Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening. Could you please announce yourself for the record?
Sure.
Your name,
my
and
name
who
is
you are,
Zhen
and
Yu.
credentials.
Sure. My name is Zhen Yu Tian, and I'm an assistant professor at Northeastern University at Boston. My expertise is the chemical analysis of environmental contaminants, including the chemicals that's leaching out from tire rubber and crumb rubber from the fields.
And can you tell the commission a little bit about your education, training, and experience in that area?
Sure. So I actually got my PhD degree in environmental science and engineering from UNC Chapel Hill in 2018. And I've actually working on the analysis of organic pollutants since 2011. So I have more than 10 years of experience working in this field. And specifically to stormwater and the rubber chemicals, that's beginning from 2018. So yeah, this is my expertise and experience.
And Dr. Chen, have you had an opportunity to study the effects of artificial turf fields or the crumb rubber infill of artificial turf fields on any environmental resources?
Yes, so we actually have a publication last year on the chemical composition, the analysis on rubber chemicals, not only from the tire in use, but also from rubber collected from artificial turf field, as well as things like sneaker soles and other rubber products. And we are able to see they have similar composition as the rubber in use.
And can you tell the commission a little bit about that study?
So you're mentioning the artificial turf study, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So generally, this is after what we have found in 2020, where we are able to see the rubber chemical called 6-50-quinone becoming very lethal to a species of salmon. And then one of our question is when we are putting all this like recycled rubber into the crumb rubber field, we have direct contact with these things. Are we actually in contact with the same chemicals? So that's where we started, and we are able to measure, I think it's like a few, I forgot the exact number, but a few turf fields in the greater Seattle area. And we also got samples from different, like sneaker soles, the rubber doormat, and we found the same chemical that kills the fish were in these, and we are able to quantify these concentrations. Some of them are relatively high. So that's the study.
In terms of the crumb rubber, such as is used as infill on turf fields, what are the sort of compounds or contaminants that you found were released by the crumb rubber?
Sure. So my experience, my focus were mostly on trace organic contaminants. So when we are looking at the composition of tire rubber, we are not only looking at the polymers, but actually a lot of additives in there, such as plasticizer, antioxidant, and the curing agents. So these things, depending on the usage, they're added into different amount, and also, they have different properties. Specifically, like 6-PBD is a antioxidant. It protects the tire from oxygen attack or ozone attack. That's about 1% of the tire rubber. And we are also seeing some other things like diphenylguanidine. So that's a curing agent. So that's when you are trying to put all these layers of raw rubber together. This is a chemical you put in there to sticking them together.
And those chemicals were released and conveyed by stormwater?
Yes. Yes. So if you collect water from like a downspout from a highway, you're able to see them. And even you just take a little bit from like a pound on the highway after a rain, you should be able to see those chemicals.
And did you also study specifically the crumb rubber and turf fields? Did you take samples from turf fields?
Yes. yeah, some of them was the publication I mentioned from 2023. And we also have some unpublished data from Massachusetts, where we see the soil near artificial turf field contains the rubber chemicals, obviously higher than reference sites.
And you're also aware from your from this research and from from the materials you reviewed that there were also metals released from rubber.
Yes, from my readings and my previous experience, we know that metals such as zinc are leaching from rubber when it's in contact with water.
And it's, again, it's conveyed, but it's released and conveyed but through the effect of the contact between the water and the crumb rubber.
Yes.
And going back just to the study that you conducted, you focused specifically on the effects of that on salmon. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what was the effect of those compounds and contaminants on the salmon?
Not sure if you allow me to use the presentation, or I can just say either way works.
So there was a slide.
Yeah, please, I mean, put the slide up. I think that'd be helpful.
Sure. Are you able
Be
to
able to share a screen.
share screen?
Okay, let me slideshow here a little bit. Okay, so generally this is what we are looking at. Are you looking at the screen, slideshow?
Yes.
We're looking,
Okay.
we see it, we see the whole presentation. We see the slides on the side and a primary slide.
Oh, okay, that's not good.
We need a presentation mode, I think.
So, well, I have two screens, that's messing things up. So I'll just start from here. That works. So generally, I will say this is a symptom specific to Pacific salmon. So you can see this is called urban runoff mortality syndrome. In October, November, on the West Coast, a species called coho salmon will swimming up the creeks to lay their eggs. And when they are in urban creeks, they will show this weird symptom, almost like drunk, losing equilibrium, gaping for air, and they will die after several hours showing the symptom. The problem is they die before they get into their destination. So if you cut open a female salmon like this, you will see all the eggs are in there. So this is problematic because it's threatening the population of coho salmon. So we want to figure out why this is happening. And, this has been observed for 1 or 2 decades. And our collaborators who, are toxicologists, biologists, they found that this is related to traffic intensity. So like I said, if you collect, stormwater from the road, this actually can kill the salmon relatively fast. Although they know this is related to road, maybe cars, but like 5-6 years ago, they don't know what it is. And my old research group at the University of Washington, we came in because we are environmental chemists. And we are able to use some very advanced chemical methods to figure out what are the sources of the chemical. And it turned out that we narrow down scope to tires, because chemically, all the water that kills salmon were similar to the leachate from tire rubber particles, so that we know, okay, this is something about tire rubber. And from there, my work was actually to really finding the smoking gun chemical that kills salmon. So we starting from the tire leachate. Unfortunately, it's a very complex mixture, so we are seeing thousands of things. We have to get this work almost like 2 years kind of work, starting from 1,000 to narrow down to only a few things. And we are able to purify a chemical that kills coho salmon. And that chemical turned out to be 6-PBD quinol. So this thing, down below. And this is actually a transformation product from 6-PBD. And we have purified this thing, we have our collaborators synthesize the thing, and we confirm it kills. So this work has been widely reported because it's one of the very recent case that even in a developed country like United States, you can see, chemicals killing wild animals. So yeah, this is generally the result. So this is the kind of effect we see from this study. And I mentioned the 2023 paper. This is a few figures from that. So as you can see that, all these like chemicals are in rows and all these like different samples are in columns. So higher particle is over here, and from rubber, as you can see, is around here. So that's very similar chemically, showing the similar contaminants.
So you.
And okay, should I continue? Okay, so this is the one I mentioned, the data in Massachusetts. So you can see 4 chemicals collected, in soil samples, and those soils are near a artificial turf field. And we can see for each of the panel, the rightmost is almost like a blank, right? This is our reference level. And this purple is actually the soil in, like a retention pond near the field. So you can see all these 4 chemicals having elevated concentration, including the chemical that kills fish. So that's what I can share over here. Hopefully that's clear enough.
And and the chemicals you found in the soil had a similar profile to the findings with respect to the water coming off a roadway.
Yes.
I don't know if the commission has questions.
Any
Yeah,
commission-
Doctor.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Mr. Stepanek.
Yes, this is Dan Stepanek. Are you saying there is no treatment? You didn't mention a treatment. And that word has been bandied about now for the last hour. Do you feel there is a treatment for this rubber chemical that would come out of the garage? And it's the same thing you're talking about with it's killing the salmon?
I'm not entirely sure if I understand the question, because
Is there a treatment for, what is the treatment, do you think, is for the rubber chemical? And I'm assuming you're showing this because the chemical is the same that is going to come, that the salmon are dying from, and it's going to be flowing out of the stormwater of the garage that they're proposing. Are you talking about the same rubber chemical?
yes.
So I think
Yes,
I can jump in. I think Dr. Tian is not an expert on treating it. He is more.
well, I can talk something about treatment, but I'm not seeing the similar type of treatment or I don't know any treatment related to this situation over here. On the West Coast, generally we are using bioswales, like you already mentioned, things like, like rain garden. But for that type of treatment, you need soil and you need some compost that can remove this toxic chemical. But without those things, I don't think sand can remove these.
Yeah,
Okay.
Beth Sanford here. This is not on.
I know you don't need to turn that on. Your voice will be transmitted by the
Okay.
speaker on the ledge here.
This off then?
Yeah, it doesn't matter, but we can hear you.
It's just, yes, I'm not a chemist, so, but the study you did in Washington outside of Seattle, did you conclusively prove that that was the cause of the death of the salmon? I mean, because I saw the headline that says it's a prime suspect.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So in 2018, that's a suspect, but in 2021, we nailed it. We are pretty sure it's the thing. It's already being repeated by not only scientists in the United States, but also Canada and Japan. Some of the other species in their countries also suffered from this. So pretty sure.
So in terms of, is it likely that some of those chemicals are in the wetlands now from the current artificial turf?
Yeah, that's possible. Although I haven't measured your town samples, but from what I see in Massachusetts, that's likely.
And because of this study, are people across America now testing and evaluating the ecological effect? I mean, what do you, has this become confirmed in multiple cases?
Sure. So on the West Coast, this is bigger because they have multiple species of salmon suffer from this thing, right? From rainbow trout to coho salmon to king salmon. So actually the state of Washington and California are pushing the manufacturers to change their tire formula. So this is getting big. But then in other states, right, like especially East Coast, it turned out that Atlantic salmon is actually fine with its chemical. So the toxicity might not be a big driven factor, but from the impact of the study, we realized there are a lot more chemicals than we previously thought. Tire chemicals. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions from the commission? Very good. So Attorney Green, shall we proceed?
Yes.
Chairman, I'm sorry, I have one question for the professor.
Yeah, Attorney Finn, with great respect, you're going to have a great opportunity afterwards to rebut, to speak to all the points that are raised. And I would like to suggest that you reserve your questions to that point, unless there's something that you think is absolutely really, really crucial. And that's a very high test, because I didn't think that the technical questions last time quite met that standard.
Okay.
With due respect.
I do have one question for the current witness, and I think it is relevant. If you don't, so let me ask it, and if you think it's out of order, maybe he doesn't have to answer. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
So your study, it seems to me that the problem out in Washington was the dying off of the salmon, correct?
Yes.
All right. There didn't seem to be any mention of any other species or frogs or toads or anything like that dying off in connection with this study. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, so we are seeing multiple species of fish affected by this.
Okay, but no amphibians or anything like that, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Attorney Green.
Just as a follow-up, Dr. Tien, was it your focus to look at amphibious creatures?
No, I can, because that's not my focus, and I've never tested other species. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
I have one follow-up question. Kathleen Holland for the record. So if I understand the working theory or proven theory is that, is it tire road runoff that is the impact?
Yes, so specifically in Seattle, yes, because it's actually, there's an effort to bring back salmon into the urban watersheds. And these watersheds actually receive the runoff from highways. So that is why these chemicals get into the creeks.
So the chemical that was isolated from all of the runoff that's potentially coming off a highway is broken down to the rubberized material? Is that what I'm understanding?
So it's a complicated question because some of the chemicals were dissolved in water in a solution, but others might actually be just like tiny nano tire particles along with the water. So it can be actually a turbid flow goes into the water. And both this solution and these particles may contribute to the mortality of the salmon. We are not exactly sure how much proportion for each.
Thank you.
And Dr. Tian, again, that same profile of compounds or contaminants that you found adjacent to highways in Seattle, you found adjacent to turf fields in Massachusetts.
Yes.
I have nothing further.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tian. Next, I'd like to call Jim McManus.
Sorry, one question. I may have to log off. Can I?
No problem. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Whoop. Let's try this. I'm not able to put my video on, but that's fine. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good evening, Jim McManus, certified professional soil scientist with JMM Wetland Consulting Services with offices in Newtown. My comments are going to be brief as my December 14th letter kind of asked about water quality. Mr. Trinkus already talked a lot about that, and my problem was that we didn't have the soil information or soil pits to distinguish what exactly we're infiltrating into. The applicant responded to that question by saying the borings are in detailed geotechnical, detailed geotechnical reports are provided in Appendix D of the Stormwater Management Report. As was mentioned before, borings do have a place, and they're really for checking for structural strength of the material that we be holding up whatever, the building or parking lot, you know, whatever they're doing. And the geotech person can certainly opine on other aspects of the soil, but that's really not his job. They're there to check on the structural components of the soil as relates to development. For instance, you wouldn't design a septic system with using boring data. And that is applied, and I don't know why it isn't, but that same concept should be applied to all infiltration, biofiltration, rain gardens. It doesn't matter. We need to know what the soil is like that you're going to be doing this infiltration in this case. And as Mr. Trinkus said, we really want to know what the soils look like at the bottom of at the depth of the bottom of the infiltrator or whatever's being proposed. So we know where any limiting factors are, such as water tables, bedrock, lodgement tills, which is layman's term to be hardpan. So we can make some assessments on if the system is going to work or not. And then if you look at this particular site, there's most of where the stormwater is going to go has already been highly disturbed. So we really need to know, looking at deep holes, what exactly the material is and what are we placing these infiltrators in, because we really don't have any information. Could be anything. We don't know what was filled here when the area was filled to build the existing field. We have really no idea. We can gain a little bit of idea from the borings, but not really. Not to make an informed decision. And there was this discussion about, you know, should we use the manual? Is it just a, something guidelines? Well, I don't know. I mean, that's up to the engineers. But however, if you don't know what you're designing, how do you know that the design will work? So if we don't know where the systems are going to be, what the soils are like, and where the systems are going to be placed, then it doesn't really matter if you're following the manual or not. We can't really make an informed decision whether these infiltration or stormwater management is going to work as designed. That's pretty much all I need to say right now. I mean, there's a lot of discussions about turf fields and runoffs. I mean, soils are important. A lot of the chemicals that are in the chrome rubber or the crumb rubber as well as the atmospheric deposition onto any surface, including roadways. The soils help with attenuating those. For instance, the phosphorus was mentioned as a atmospheric deposition. Well, when phosphorus binds to the soil, it doesn't go anywhere. The only time phosphorus gets to be a problem is when it's leached away off of the soil through erosion and things like that. It ends up into particularly a stream would be an issue, or a pond, which causes the over eutrophication. And we see those green ponds if you drive around town sometimes. Particularly, I do a lot of work in town of Greenwich, and you always see green little farm ponds around these properties because of all the excess nutrients. So that's it for me. Any questions? I'm here.
Just briefly, you heard Mr. Trinkus talking about the lack of, in his opinion, the lack of treatment. You heard Dr. Tien talk about the and I know you've seen his report, in the discharge of compounds and contaminants. And in terms of whether any discharge is acceptable of those compounds or contaminants into a wetland, can you address that as a wetland soil scientist?
Well, again, the applicant's engineer needs to prove to the commission that all these chemicals that come off of anything. I mean, as was mentioned a minute ago, roads, rubber tires, the same chemicals are found in those runoffs as they find in artificial turf fields, because the same material is being used. So we need to have a stormwater design that is going to adequately treat these all this, including the ones that we've been discussing prior to in discharge to the wetlands. That's part of the regulations. We need to prove that we're not going to have an adverse direct impact to wetlands. So, and I haven't heard through testimony to date, and then reading some of the rebuttal information, that has been addressed effectively for me anyways.
Hope the commission has questions for Mr. McManus.
Questions? This is Angela Jameson for the record, Mr. McManus. What is your view on whether the chemicals that are currently coming off the artificial turf field that is currently there are any more benign than what might come off the new artificial turf field? I mean, we're not talking about a artificial turf field going in de novo. There is already one there with all the pollutants that there may or may not be.
Right. So your question is, since they're building a new field, that it doesn't matter how they treat their runoff?
I'm asking whether the situation is going to be worse.
I have no idea how to answer that, but
okay.
Why would we not make it better? Is be my question to you.
So you're kind of answering the question. You're kind of implying that that the new artificial turf field will actually be an improvement on the old one.
How did I say that? They're not treating their stormwater. So I'm saying if let's just say we can't prove that the original turf has an issue, but the new turf, we're not going to treat the runoff. We're just not going to care because the old one didn't do anything. I just don't understand why you would even take that position.
Well, I'm just asking a question and you're answering my question with a question, so I'm not really any clearer.
Okay.
I can say actually, Beth Evans, Dr. Beth Evans, she actually talked the first couple of years of the new turf field is significantly worse than a 20-year-old field. It's like, it's all front loaded. But her letter and the materials in her citations does speak to that specifically.
So thank you for the clarification. For the record, that was Sarah Pierce.
For the record, I am not an engineer or an environmental, but I was involved with another project along the turf field. And there was a comparison made to it being like tea. And that basically it's, especially in summer months when the water is warm, there's and this was in another project, there is a higher discharge rate, and that I guess I would argue maybe that over time it's discharging less because it's leached out over in this field over 15 years and 18 years or however long it's been there. But I would also suggest that in this case, you have a new application before you. And if you suspect that there is an issue with the wetlands existing and with the school discharging into the wetlands, and that's something that your staff or you might investigate as a town to determine if that's going on. And it's akin, I suppose, to a violation if that's happening, and that should be investigated. And the regulations don't speak to you necessarily an improvement. Really, you have to show that the regulated activity you seek is satisfies your regulation. But I understand it.
Fine. So we have any more questions? Or shall we move on? Okay.
I'd like to call George Logan. And as George approaches, his resume is in the record, and his written report is in the record. And we may have comments on that question as well.
Which one is that? Hello, everyone. George Logan for the record. Just by way of background, I hold a master's degree in natural resources science, concentration in conservation biology. And I've been in this field now for a little over 35 years. I have certain certifications as a registered soil scientist, also as a senior ecologist through Ecological Society of America, and a professional wetland scientist through the Wetland Society. And one of the things that I can tell you is also that I do third-party reviews for a lot of municipalities. So I'm not here as necessarily an advocate. I'm here as hopefully just to give you my professional opinion of what I see here. And this is a subject that's unfortunately immense. We have been educated, so our knowledge base has increased exponentially since, let's say, about 10 or 15 years ago, as far as potential impacts from crumb rubber associated with synthetic fuels. And as I've watched this, and I haven't really been involved with synthetic fuels all the time. It comes from time to time. Every time I'm involved, I look at the science base, and every time I look at it, it's balloon. It's just an amazing thing. So this is a conversation that can go on for a while because there's a lot of different intricate parts to it. But what I want to do is to basically go through parts of my report and to tell you what I've done and some of the conclusions that I've come based on my review of the plans, also review of the documentation that the applicant has provided, my review of the scientific literature as of today, actually. I was doing some of that today also, again, because there's so much of it. And also I was able to, should we say, look at the site from the perimeter. I did that on January 12th. And what I wanted to do is I never want to not be able to see the site, not be able to see the natural resource, the regulated resource, which in this case is a fairly large system. Probably the contiguous wetland is about 21 or so acres to that little pinch point under a access driveway, and then it goes down into the reservoir out through a perennial stream which it joins. There's a semi-perennial stream that comes from up gradient. It moves through the particular property that we're talking about, and then joins the other stream, and then it goes down towards the reservoir, which is a drinking water reservoir. So I'll call it semi-perennial stream. It has about 57 acres of watershed. So what I did is I came as close as I could to the property boundary, so I'm not accused of trespassing. Maybe I could have asked for permission to do it, but I'd rather, just go ahead and do what I did. And what I did is I wanted to look at the swamp and also kind of characterize it a little bit. And also take a water sample of the water course. This is a semi-perennial water course that goes through. And that's probably the more sensitive resource when you look at the entire ecosystem. And you've probably already seen the results from that one sampling. I also I had a pre-calibrated electronic meter, and I kind of stuck it and showed a picture there and took the picture of what it told you. And that was one of the photos. I think it was photo number. Let's see. That was photo number 5. And you can see there, if you squint a little bit, you see the conductivity 161. 161 for that translates to 161. See the pH is 6.48, so it's slightly acidic. And other parameters, but those are the main ones. And then when you look at the analytical result from Phoenix Laboratory, the thing that I wanted to focus on is zinc. We're going to be talking a little bit more about zinc as we go along, because that's one of the major components that leaches out of crumb rubber, which is the infill part of the synthetic field. And you can see that the zinc is at the basically the meter that they used, or the apparatus that they used to do that is it can only measure as low as 0.004 milligrams per liter, and that's exactly how much zinc was in there. So it's very, very low, extremely low. If you look at the nitrogen is 0.62. That's kind of what you would expect at the time of the year. And then total nitrogen is 1.38, slightly elevated, but again, for this type of year, it's because there's not a lot of biological activity that's happening. So obviously, so the reason for this is to tell you that what's coming into the system, the water is indeed a Class A water course, which is indeed what is classified under the Connecticut DEP classification system. So I'm not going to go into too much in telling you what the swamp looks like. I think my colleague has also opined on that. It's not the right time to tell you exactly what the biodiversity is, but I did give you some of that information. You have an organic swamp. You have a semi-perennial stream that flows through it. You have a moderate biodiversity based on what you saw. You have a limited amount of invasive species in the center of the portion of the swamp. As you go out to the margins, you see a lot more, obviously, which would be something that you would expect. One of the things that I also noted, and I'll bring it up now, is that, and it is relevant to some extent because of what I think the synthetic field without proper treatment is likely to do, which is to contaminate the water course. And that is that down gradient, you have the semi-perennial stream, it meets the perennial stream, and then it goes down towards the reservoir. You have an estimated habitat of a Connecticut listed species, and it seems to be centered around the water course. So it could be a terrestrial species, and then we wouldn't probably have a concern. But if it is not, if it's a aquatic or semi-aquatic species, then there might be concern because there might be some sensitivity to it. I'm sure nowadays the applicant's professional will probably have been able to go in and you will able to tell us what that is, because you can actually go to the portal and sometimes you're able to get that information. But I thought that was not my business to do, and it was the applicant's business to do. All right. My major issue with this is not that I'm opposed with athletic fields. Obviously, my kids have told me, my grandchildren hopefully will be playing on them soon. But I think you will notice that is what the scientific literature seems to tell us is that we have a whole bunch of drawbacks when it comes to artificial synthetic turf because of what we're learning as far as not only the the contaminants that are leaching out and contaminating our aquatic resources, but also on another issue, which is the issue of microplastics. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go. So the major issue that has emerged as I've been reviewing this application is the lack of proper best management practice for the attenuation of stormwater runoff associated not only with synthetic turf, but also just generally with what they're doing. So one of the contentions of the applicant is that, and this is quoting them, based on the Connecticut Stormwater Quality Manual, there are no special water quality treatment requirements for synthetic turf fields. Yeah, they're correct. The manual says absolutely nothing. If you do a search on the document, the PDF, nothing comes up on synthetic turf fields at all. However, I guess the DEP, as Mr. Trinkhouse said, it was probably not on the radar back in 2002, 2004. They tried to address this issue by a report that came a little later in 2010, when they went out and looked at a bunch of fields. And the publication is entitled Final Report, Artificial Turf Study, Leachate and Stormwater Characteristics. And I've excerpted a couple of the quotes, and then I put the publication, not the whole thing because it's really voluminous and, you know, this is bad enough. But I wanted to just quote a couple of things, which I think you'll see they're not suggestions. Maybe they don't raise to the level of recommendation. But you be the judge. Publication states that since zinc concentrations, and we'll talk about zinc, in the runoff from artificial turf fields are consistent with those associated with urban runoff. So what that means, when they look at urban runoff of, say, a parking lot, and then they look what's coming off the synthetic field, the concentrations are pretty much the same, they're very equal. So then they say, it would be a logical step to apply the same best management practices to mitigate the toxicity effects to surface water. And the primary reason for that, I feel robust recommendation, is, quote, the DEP, back then it was DEP, not DEP, concludes that there is a potential risk for surface waters. Again, they're trying to be honest here, and aquatic organisms associated with coal effluent and zinc toxicity of stormwater runoff from artificial turf fields. Zinc concentrations in the stormwater may cause exceedance of acute aquatic toxicity criteria for receiving waters, especially smaller water courses. So if you have a large water course, you have a lot of dilution. If you have a small water course, like the one that we're talking about, associated with a swamp, which is semi-perennial, doesn't have a big watershed, it sort of magnifies potential effect because the concentrations are magnified basically. So as I mentioned, the scientific literature is very robust, especially as the years have gone by. And mind you, the first studies that probably were seminal studies that happened regarding this issue of the artificial turfs probably goes back to the early 2000s. There's some of it slightly before, but as you get to about 2010, 2012, it just expands exponentially. So the issue is, as you know, crumb rubber is basically ground up recycled tires. And we all thought, oh, great, we can take these tires that are filling the environment to do something with it. But we didn't think of what the processes are that go into, and I think the good doctor talked about that, into making tires and some of the additives that they have to put in there to help them to extend their longevity, say, against the elements that tires face when we drive them around. And we're talking specifically about the zinc here, and those other obviously compounds. As a matter of fact, if you look at the literature, anywhere from 150 to 200 different compounds come off a rubber, this kind of rubber, which is mind-boggling. But let's specifically talk about zinc. Zinc is used as part of the vulcanization of tires. It's basically, we have found no other way to do it. And when we're talking about zinc here, we're not talking particulate zinc, we're talking about soluble zinc, which basically is soluble and goes into the environment. Here's a quote again from that particular publication. The pollutant substances found in artificial turf contribute to the contamination of soil, plants, and aquatic organisms. Aquatic ecosystems impose a risk of toxic effects for aquatic and sediment-dwelling organisms. The resulting environmental harm is ongoing and long-term, happening over many years. That's an important point. And maybe it will help to partially answer some of the questions that we've heard even from some of the members of this commission. The problem is that these chemicals that come off synthetic turf, including zinc, tend to bioaccumulate. What does that mean? It means the more the runoff comes off them, the stuff doesn't say, okay, we have so much comes off and then it disappears. No, it bioaccumulates in the environment. Some of it will be absorbed to the soil, downgrading of the discharges, which seems to be a good thing, right? However, it's happening in the wetlands. And there are effects that happen in the wetlands and the soil structure and the plants and the organisms there, which is this is what it's pointing out to. And it accumulates over time, which means it becomes worse and worse. There's no path for these chemicals to, because they're not biodegradable. They just don't disappear into the environment. We're done with it. They not only do they bioaccumulate, but what happens is when they break down, the byproducts is they start sort of this, coming into contact with each other, create other compounds that actually become sometimes more toxic than the original compounds. And I think the doctor might have mentioned that also. So the other thing that's interesting here is, and you've heard this, that years ago we had the issue with everyone's talking about acid rain. But we had a big problem. The acid rain meant that we had rainwater that was coming down that had all these acids, especially NOx, coming off some of the plants that were spewing things into the environment and creating this acidic rain that was coming down and doing certain things. Believe it or not, our water is still acidic. It's not as bad as it used to be, which would be like 4.8, 4.9 in the pH scale. Now it's 5.1, 5.2. And I created the data for you here from what the government is doing. We have a study site up in Pomfret. Mind you, Pomfret is rural. New Canaan isn't. We're much closer to New York and the metropolitan area, which means your acidity in the rainwater is probably going to be a little low. Why am I saying this? Because the more the acidity is lower, the more the leaching potential from rubber of these compounds, especially now. So you have the National Atmospheric Deposition Program and that Connecticut conference site, which gives you that data. We'll come back to that. Now, another thing that's interesting here, and that's why I brought my phone, because I don't have the maps, but I got onto the portal. Thank you very much for that. It says, welcome to New Canaan. So I went there and I found the cross section of the synthetic field that's going to be on top of the slab. And ladies and gentlemen, there is no porous underlayment of gravel under that. Here's what it looks like. Top layer, synthetic turf, system, and infill mix. Infill is the some rubber infill. Below that, we have, quote, shock pad / drainage. Under that, we have a roof membrane. And under that, we have a concrete slab. Typically, what you find out is that in the artificial turf fields that I've been involved in and I've seen, you have this, the synthetic turf, the blades, and then the infill. And under that, you have several layers. couple of different layers, and then on the bottom layer, probably something in the order, maybe 10 inches, 8 to 10 inches, you have the under drain system. So what happens is the rain comes down, it infiltrates vertically through the system, gets into this more porous area, and then moves through the under drain system to wherever we want it to go. In this particular case, what happens is the water comes down, hits the crumb rubber, and goes horizontal. And what does that tell you? It tells you you're going to have a longer contact time with the crumb rubber than if it was just a vertical situation, which means you're going to have a lot more leaching potential, which means you're going to have a lot more zinc and other compounds that will be leaching. So that's a problem. And that's not yet another reason why a robust treatment train system is recommended not only by DEP, but also by other professionals that are reviewing this application. Now, in addition to, and we're concentrating on zinc, but again, remember, I'm just concentrating on zinc because DEP says that zinc, and to some extent copper in some of their studies, and cadmium in some of their other studies, are the ones that are toxic to the environment, and they've done their studies to show that. But as Mr. Trinkhaus has said, and I agree, we still have a substantial amount of atmospheric fallout, which includes the soluble, the wet portion of nitrogen that falls onto surfaces. And if we're going to look at this synthetic turf field as being basically, as the DEP says, like a parking lot in essence, that's the way it works, then we have to be also cognizant of the fact that we have nitrogen pollution that we have to deal with. And I included in the report, again, from that study, from that national monitoring study in Pomfret, Connecticut, the amount of nitrogen that is falling from the sky in Pomfret, and I would expect that it's a little higher here down in New Canaan, since again, we're closer to the metropolitan area. It said that the nitrogen species, and this is basically ammonia and nitrate, the two things they measured, average 0.638 milligrams per liter in 2016, 2022, and it did not include ammonia, sorry, it included ammonium and nitrate, didn't include ammonia in different species, and that's usually a more of a dry particulate form. Conservatively, based on some of the studies that I found, and I referenced it in my report, up to 40% of nitrogen in our stormwater is associated with atmospheric deposition. And here's interesting that I found is a study from the University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center, which is probably the premier place that's studying in our region, our ecoregion, stormwater management and best management practices and so on. This is what they say. They did their own studies, and they said runoff from these fields, the ones they studied, synthetic turfs, contain higher amounts of dissolved inorganic nitrogen than nearby impermeable asphalt parking lots. And it appears that the turf's crumb rubber infill is generating this nitrogen. So apparently we have also an internal leaching out of nitrogen that has been somehow trapped in this crumb rubber, which is again recycled tires. All right. Now we come to another issue. And again, I'm kind of glossing over a few things because I don't want to be here until midnight. I don't think you do either. So, but another emerging issue that has been coming up has to do with microplastics. Like, what are microplastics? Well, microplastics are basically the definition, any piece of plastic, which include, by the way, crumb rubber, that is less than 5 millimeters in size, which is 0.216 inches or something like that, 0.21. But now the average microplastic size is about 1 millimeter, really routine. What's the problem with that? And how does these things happen? Well, it's the weathering, the degradation of these plastics in the crumb rubber, but and also the crumb rubber, but also in the little synthetic blades that, you know, people run on. Of course, you can imagine that they're not going to stay in place. There's going to be some degradation with that. And as a matter of fact, a lot of infill, rubber infill kind of leaves from the use of the fields. And from what studies I've seen, there's evidence that that the crumb rubber has to be maintained by putting more into it. And then some studies show that hundreds of pounds of this rubber, new rubber, this has to be put into these fields on an annual basis. So the question is, where's all that rubber that they're replacing going? Well, obviously some of it leaves on people's feet. But a lot of it, I expect, is also in the stormwater stream. Okay, microplastics. Big issue. And one that's, because the science has emerged. And what I'll do is I don't want to inundate you with too much, but there's 2 articles that I'm going to give for the record, and I'm going to give to the applicant in a few moments. And these are what you call overviews of meta studies, which basically, it's not a specific study that's been done in the field, but it's someone going and looking at all the studies that have been done on this issue, which is the microplastics and the environmental critical review. And then another one, which is microplastics in aquatic systems, a review of occurrence monitoring potential environmental risks. Interestingly enough, and I feel ashamed of the United States, a lot of these studies have been done abroad. Italy, Germany, China. Oh my goodness, these people are way ahead of us. And what it shows you is just an overview of the issue with microplastics. So why are microplastics an issue? Well, I'm going to touch a little bit on what the doctor said. Again, an average 1 millimeter or so in size from the studies that I've seen. Most of these plastic pieces that go into the environment from this weathering and has to do is non-biodegradable, so they're there for a very long time. And they release toxics. Now you say why they release toxics, and the doctor mentioned that in the production of crumb rubber tires, they use additives. And so some of these additives are what are extremely toxic. And of course, the byproducts and the interaction of the byproducts, as I mentioned before. So they release toxics. And then the other thing that's interesting about them is they have a very high absorption capacity. When you think about it, they have many of these plastic little things, and sometimes they're fibers, sometimes they're, you know, generally speaking, the environment, in particular case here, there will be these little minute pieces of crumb rubber that's going into the environment, have this absorption capacity. And what they found is that the absorption capacity, what does that mean? It means the toxics in the environment go onto them. Not only what's already coming off them, but also what's generally in the environment. So this magnet. They're the thousands times more absorptive than soil particles. So that tells you that we have a problem here. And they affect, if you look at these studies, they affect the lower trophic level. So if you think about, and I'll give you a few examples. The lower trophic levels are algae and your little small, like Daphnia, some of these filtering organisms, and you go up from there, microinvertebrates, etc. So the filtering organisms, they can't distinguish between food and a piece of plastic. And what they found is they take them into their body. And so these toxics, if I accumulate with them, they might not kill them necessarily yet, but then another organisms that's higher in the trophic level comes and eats that, and the body accumulates the toxic even more, and then goes up the trophic ladder, and then a fish gets it. And Why did the doctor study fish? Well, because they're keystone species. They're indicators of environmental quality. So if a robust fish is getting impacted, it tells you what's going on below it in the lower portions of the trophic ladder. So you have toxics that accumulate that affects prey predation relationships. So they found, for instance, that even the smaller organisms that the fish feed on have ways, mechanisms to avoid being predated. And now they're being predated a lot more because they don't have those mechanisms. We have acute toxicity, lethal and sublethal levels all the way down the trophic ladder. They have effects on reproduction. The list goes on and the effects that we have here. So, but you say, okay, well, that's fine if it gets to the watercourse. But what if it just gets to the soil of the wetland? Is that going to have an effect? I said, well, so there's been studies, and this is the reason I'm giving you these, that they found that the microplastics destroy soil structure, altering the physical chemical properties of soils that affects nutrient mobility and nutrient availability, moisture diffusion. It also reduces availability of nutrients, alters the microbial activity. Obviously, with the microbial activity in soils, even wetland soils are extremely important, has to do with nutrient cycling, and affects plant development, plant growth, and reduces germination. It also slows down development of roots during germination. So there's effects all the way into the wetland and down into the water column. And I know the question that the chairman is going to ask me, what's happening now versus what would happen in the future? Well, good question. We don't know. Why don't you ask them? Because one of the things I would have done if I was a consultant to that, shame on me, is I would have said, and believe me, I do synthetic field proposals, and I'm always talking to the engineers saying, we have a problem here. We need to do bioretention. We need to do this, that, or the other thing, or else we're going to have a problem with their water course. And I have a project right now. I can't tell you where it is, or someone will come in. But here's the issue. The issue there, we could have gone into the current discharges of where the fields are discharging, or the particular fields discharging, and look at the soils and do some analysis. Look at the water quality at these points, the closest one to the water course, and maybe do one further down before it joins the other water course, or that little pond. That's where I guess they jump. And come back and say, okay, do we see any effects? Where are the effects? Are they in the water course? Maybe they're not. Are they in the wetlands? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. And that would give us a little bit of better understanding of what we need to do. The bottom line, even if we don't have that data, my recommendation still is, and it's the DP's recommendation, I believe, the logical step, is that they should provide bioretention or extended detention or something that has biological things that are happening in there for plant uptake and microbial activity to take all these pollutants, whether they're nitrogen, whether they're zinc, whether they're other things, and sequester them in something that can be maintained before it goes out into the natural environment. It's a simple thing. It's not, excuse the phrase, you've heard it so many times, rocket science. Let's do what's right. Now, we've talked a little bit about synthetic fuel. I just want to talk about a couple more things, and then I'll open it to whatever questions you might have. We've talked a lot about the synthetic fuel, but I want to talk about the rest of it. Whatever they do in their stormwater for the corral parking, as they call it, and also for their below ground garage. Now, I get it, and I think I agree with Mr. Trinkow, so we don't have to hold them to a 1 inch. A half inch seems reasonable to me as far as the water quality, because there's going to be this tracking, especially during bad weather, of chemicals and pollutants that come off tires, etc. They're going to be going in and out. And at the end of the day, if they're just treating the 21,000 square feet, which is the perimeter of the blow by, or whatever they called it. But what happens to the rest of it? You mean, these chemicals that are gonna be in there, they're just gonna sit there forever? They're not gonna sit there forever. They're gonna get out into the environment sooner or later. We're gonna have to come up with some solution for that. So I think it's a real thing. We need to do that. Now, the other thing, so when they reconfigure the corral, what they did is I looked at their stormwater management report, and they have a little subshed of about 1,907 square feet or so, call it 2,000. That's going to this perimeter sand filter, which Mr. Trinkhouse tells me is not yet adequate, and that can be fixed. Well, that's great. What about the rest of it? The rest of it, right now, we're gonna have another 200 cars maximum coming back and forth into the garage through that one area, the driveway, that other little queuing area that they're talking about. So we're gonna have more axle miles. And as you've probably seen in my report, axle miles or vehicle movements over pavement is what creates pollution. We have hotspots. So if you go to, say, a convenience store, there's a lot of traffic, back and forth movements. It's not necessarily because you have 5,000 square feet of impervious surface that's, and you say, well, because it's 5,000, you have this much pollution. No. If it's rarely used, you have nothing, just whatever falls from the sky and a few vehicles. But you have constant movement. It's the axle miles that are actually the ones that are concentrating the pollution. So you have hotspots. And that's what they're doing. They're not doing anything for that. They're only dealing with the 2,000 square feet to the sand filter and doing nothing with all these vehicles that are going to be going back and forth. So I believe you're going to have some kind of way of updating your system in order for you to accommodate for the increased traffic and vehicle movements over that impervious surface, as small as it might be. All right, enough of that. Well, the parking lot has a capacity of 200 vehicles.
I just pointed out that I think that gain is something on the order of 84 vehicles.
I know that they said that they were queuing somewhere else, and so that was a problem there, but wanted to take care of what's going on here. The other issue is, I think, was mentioned by Attorney Green, is the dismantling and removal of the existing fields. That's an issue for me, because one of the things that I just talked about is these minute microplastics. And as you work this thing, well, guess what happens to these? They go up into the atmosphere and they fall down in the surrounding areas, and some of it will get into the wetlands. So it's fugitive microplastics, and whatever else they're bringing with them as far as pollutants is also an issue. I did want to address one last thing. I wrote it somewhere, and I think I'll cease and desist that in the box. Okay. The question, I know there are various opinions about this, but the question is, so what about the 2004 Stormwater Quality Manual, the one that's going to be coming out in March? It's actually already come out, but it's going to be official in March. What about it? Well, I can tell you a few things. One is that many towns, including town of Vernon, town of Manchester, they do a whole bunch of work. I live up there. Actually require, like the town engineer said, that the 2004 manual and whatever the successor is going to be is followed. Seems reasonable. What's the original reason for this Stormwater Quality Manual? It's a good question. Well, here's what it is. It's called the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act, which is a federal legislation, is what is behind this. Why? Because the federal government came to the state and said, hey, you want some money to take care of water quality problems? You gotta get a manual out there that says you're gonna follow what we want you to follow. So that's what they had to do. And it all came from the national environmental NERC study that happened back in the 80s. And the reason for that, what it ties into, which is, again, comes from the Clean Water Act, is that the Connecticut state has what they call an anti-degradation policy, which is connected to their water quality classification of surface waters. So we have a Class A water, and by the way, the groundwater is GAA, which is the highest you can get. And the reason for that is because we have a drinking water supply, what this is all going to. They might tell you, you have to be a little better in doing things here, but that's the anti-degradation policy. That's why the stormwater quality manual has become in existence, because you have to keep Class A waters, Class A waters, and the way to do that is by following the manual, which follows clean water. Does that help a little bit? Okay. I probably forgot to mention a few things, and you're probably going to ask me what those are.
I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions.
And now let me give these to
Thanks, George. Thank
just
you.
one copy. I'm sorry. Trying to save paper.
Do you have these electronically?
Yes.
Can you send them to me, so that we can upload them?
Yep.
Great.
So, you reviewed the plans, and by the way, just for the benefit of the commission, I think I was imprecise in my questioning of Mr. Trinkus, because if you go to drawing CI 501, you include those two synthetic turf field sections, and it shows an at-grade synthetic turf concrete. Shows anchor curve, but it also shows the composition of the field as having a turf stone base, a stone base under it. But Mr. Logan is absolutely correct that the turf field, as shown in diagram H5, but again on CI 501, shows the synthetic turf system and infill mix sitting on top of a root membrane which sits on a concrete slab. So there is no infiltrating stone underneath the turf field as it was proposed. So I just wanted to correct that for the record. So, Mr. Logan, in the wetlands regulations in the town of New Canaan, there are definitions in section 2. And number 37 is rendering unclean or impure. And that is defined as means any alteration of the physical, chemical, or biological properties of any of the waters of the town of New Canaan, including but not limited to change in composition, color, odor, turbidity, temperature, taste. Pollution is defined in 31, paragraph 31. Pollution means it lists a number of things, but it also includes the contamination or rendering unclean or impure of any of the waters of the town by reason of any waste or other materials discharged or deposited therein by any public or private sewer, or otherwise so as to directly or indirectly come in contact with any wetlands or water course. With those definitions in mind, you reviewed the treatment method that is proposed by the applicant, correct?
Yes.
And in your professional opinion, do you have any, can you render an opinion as to whether pollution will result from this project that is presently comprised in the wetland?
Yeah, I would say that it's highly likely that it's going to be an adverse physical impact to the chemical and biological constitution of the wetlands that we receive as well.
With that, I have no further questions.
So questions from the commission members,
I have one.
please.
Mr. Logan, during your testimony, I believe I heard you sort of summarize that as the solution to largely the problems that you addressed could be the proper development of a bioretention system. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be one solution. I mean, there's several other potential best management practices that are seen in the manual, the one we have and the one that's coming. pretty similar in many ways.
Mhm.
So yes, what you need is a medium, soil medium, because that does a lot of things for you. And you need vegetation that's going to do uptake, and it also promotes microbial activity in the root zone. So that's going to go a long way to attenuate whatever's coming, both off the parking areas that now we have a lot more, and also in the synthetic field. So yes, but it would have to be designed and sized appropriately for the work quality.
It would also have to be supported by adequate soil testing and
Absolutely.
percolation.
And a long-term management plan.
Mhm.
So you just don't let it go, because what I'm thinking is going to happen is if you have such a system, these components that we're trying to take out are going to accumulate in the soil, particularly the top just a few inches, say by retention. So that has to be basically tested, removed, and refreshed. The same thing that Mr. Trenkoff was talking about, what happens with a sand filter, where you look at it. And by the way, what happens with the sand filters, usually, if you look at the data, is the top few inches are the ones where all the chemicals accumulate. So it's actually a good idea, not only from, is it infiltrating, but on a regular basis, maybe call it every 5 years, go in and remove those top few inches and put a new layer in, and then landfill what you take out. Properly.
And a question that came to me is in response to a question that was asked by the chair earlier. Or you could evaluate whether the situation is improved in any way by this field, and bearing in mind that there are three, because I believe there are 3 turf fields on campus presently. Would you first have to do background water testing of the whole site, see what the baseline is?
Well, yeah, I mean, we come up with a program. And honestly, the school probably would be a good idea for the school to have a program like that, especially since you're above the drinking water supply. And you have a water course that might have listed species that are aquatic. So with this specific field, I would say you would want to look at the water that's coming in. Already did one sampling session. Look at the water that's going out below the field before it gets to the confluence for the watershed, for the bigger watershed. And then do 1 or 2 below. So you have basically 3 stations coming in for the water course, and then 1. And you'd have a program that looks at both wet events and dry events, and you do that, say, 2 or 3 times a year. But if we're focusing on the turf fields, that would be an important thing to do. And then I would also test the soil below the discharges. Do a transit, call it 100-foot transit until you get to the water course, where if it's 50 feet in some places, it might be less than that. And do 2 or 3 along the transit, and every so often take a sample, take it to the laboratory, and see what's there, and check for microplastic.
Know if the commission has any more questions for Mr. Williams.
No, please.
You mentioned microplastics again. Your testimony largely with microplastics, what I heard, was related to animals and fish and species, not necessarily plants
Yeah,
and
actually,
wetlands. I just want to make sure.
I did read it. That was not in my report. That's something that I gleaned from the 2 publications that I gave you. One in particular. That's what I said. And I wrote it down so that I didn't misquote someone. Look, there's at least 3 things that microplastics do to soil. And that they destroy soil structure, altering the physiochemical properties of soils, affects nutrient mobility and moisture diffusion, reduces availability of nutrients, alters microbial activity, which is obviously important, associated with nutrient cycling, affects plant development and growth, reduces seed germination, slows down development of roots during germination. So all those are adverse impacts on flora. And of course, there's also fauna within soils. Those would also be affected.
Thank you.
Like, for instance, if you have annelids, like worm species, they just go through soil, so they can bioaccumulate microplastics that have toxics. And then some comes along and looking like a little shrew, says nice worm, then the shrew gets involved and it bioaccumulates. And then goes up with the coca flower. So you can see the ecological cascade that can.
Thank you. So any more questions from commission members or Director of Inland Wetlands here? And what about on Zoom? George, Dan, any questions? Sorry, George Perkins, Dan Stepanek. No.
I don't have any, no,
No,
not
thank
right
you.
now, not right now.
Okay.
I
So,
have none at this point, but it looks like it's getting toward 10 o'clock. And I think maybe it might be appropriate to cut the meeting off.
Well, I think that's something we need to think about and discuss, but thank you for the suggestion, Mr. Perkins. So Attorney Green, what more do we have from your team?
I appreciate the focus and attention that the commission has paid. And I just have a couple, just brief, I'll cut my conclusion really short.
Very good. So we got a couple of brief comments from Attorney Green. We have other neighbors who would like to speak. Mr. Thank you. So I think we should certainly cover that. And when we got the very patient town engineer. So my suggestion is that we go through those items, and I'm sure that the applicant will have a lot of comments to make, and it might be more profitable for everyone if we were to ask for an extension and you were to present those thoughts at our next meeting. Attorney Finn, would that be congenial to you?
Well, if the decision is to continue the hearing, we will certainly consent. I would like to just consult with my clients real quick about their position, and I'll report back. It shouldn't take more than a minute or two.
Very good. In the meantime, let's continue with Attorney Green, or is that going to stop you talking to your clients?
I would like to listen in, but
of course.
Okay, so maybe after Attorney Green speaks, maybe we could take a 2-minute break.
Very good. Very good. Okay, looks like other people would like a break. Okay, Attorney Green, the floor is yours.
So I'm going to be brief, and I really appreciate your patience and the great questions you've asked on this application. We've produced, as you can see, we've produced 4 consultants. This is a matter that, as you can tell, is very, very important to my clients, and they're deeply, deeply concerned about it, and for good reason, I believe, as we've shown. But in terms of the jurisdiction of this commission and the kind of findings that you have to make in assessing this application, I call your attention to 12.2 and the standards and criteria for decision. And, early on in the kind of the things that this commission has to consider on this application is the environmental impact of the proposed regulated activity on wetlands is number 2. 3, the applicant's purpose for and any feasible and prudent alternatives to the proposed regulated activity, which alternatives would cause less or no environmental impact to wetlands or watercourses. I haven't seen any feasible or prudent alternatives presented by the applicant here. And I think that was their burden as part of their presentation on the application. 4 is the relationship between the short-term and long-term impacts of the proposed regulated activity on wetlands and watercourses. We have raised these concerns again regarding the turf fields, the infill itself, and lack of treatment. 5 is irreversible and irretrievable loss of wetlands, watercourses, which would be caused by the proposed regulated activity. And again, and one of those, including but not limited to measures to prevent or minimize pollution or other environmental damage. I think there's ample testimony that there's a lack of treatment of the pollutants or contaminants that are presented in this application. 6 is the character and degree of injury to or interference with the safety, health, and reasonable use of property, which is caused or threatened by the proposed regulated activity. 8 is measures which would mitigate the impact of any aspect of the proposed regulated activity. 12, the possible impairment of public health, safety, and welfare, which may outweigh individual property rights or public benefit if the permit is granted. In this case, St. Luke's is looking to replace the field, and they have a field that is failing. And I think that in fairly balancing the kind of findings and conclusions that this commission has to make, I think St. Luke's had to bring more to the table here, and they just didn't do it. And we are raising all these issues. And if you look through the materials, and the application is in and the documents are in, they didn't address the from rubber infill issue at all. They didn't identify the kind of products they were using. They didn't produce any material safety sheets, for example, for the materials that they're using, including this from rubber. They didn't, as Mr. Trinkus testified, as you look at these, at the application, it's unclear how much material they're excavating. They didn't offer you anything on the removal of the field, the steps and the measures involved in excavating and removing a turf field. Their cross sections show that some of the soils that are failing are deep in the ground. And I think Mr. Trinkus testified 12 to 15 feet in the ground. You've got to get to that material before you build a parking lot on top of it. And you've got to create an adequate subbase and demonstrate there's an adequate substrate for a parking lot to exist on. Now, so at the end of the day, there's a lot of work to be done on this application. I can't sit here and say, I mean, I have my own feeling about putting a turf field right next to a wetland. And I question whether, and you know, it's interesting because the Environmental Protection Act talks about eroding the public trust in the air, water, and natural resources. And I'm becoming increasingly skeptical. And I thought of this last night as I was at a friend's house who's got a gigantic TV. And we were watching a football game. And when a player, every time you saw when a player ran, there would be a cloud of black powder coming up. And I never really paid that much attention to it. But this is what's being done. This is what is going on. I thought it was very interesting that Mr. Logan said that hundreds of pounds of this material are replaced on a periodic basis. And where is it going? It's a great question. So I have my doubts about whether this can be done safely and in a manner that protects the wetlands. But having said that, what the applicant has produced does not begin to provide this commission with the information that it needs to reasonably exercise the jurisdiction vested in you to protect the wetlands. And I guess in my closing comment, and I'm sure that Mr. Fenn will produce a robust rebuttal, but I would ask that there be some guardrails on where we go from here. For example, this is a public hearing, and I frequently say this, it's a public hearing, it's not a workshop. We had 4 consultants who reviewed all the materials, and what I want to avoid is going around the circle again, where the applicant goes home and rewrites their plan, and we start all over again in this application. I think that there's a lot more homework that can be done than to sort of Frankenstein this plan, and I think the applicant has to answer a lot more questions. But I really want to avoid the submission of new materials so that I have to drag my consultants back here for the next session and we spend another 4 hours on this. But I leave that to the good guidance of the commission. And I don't know, my clients have another word. I appreciate your patience.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that on, with our neighbors, I told a lot of neighbors, this letter, it's dated on the day that I spoke with her, January 18th. Our last meeting was December 18th. It's hard to get a hold of your own relatives over the holidays, like meeting experts that you've never corresponded with, getting them to respond to you. So like this letter is new to our neighbors. A lot of them emailed me with questions about it. Same thing with Dr. Tian's presentation. So there was some discussion about closing public comment, and I hope that's not the case, since a lot of my neighbors just got this material.
I guess my last comment would be that at the beginning of this application, the applicant had suggested, and the comment was made, that we reviewed it with our neighbors in a meeting in October, and the comment was made, most, if not all of our neighbors are pleased. Well, I can assure you, based on what my clients are hearing, what I have heard, that is not the case. This is not a popularity contest, admittedly, but I just had to address that comment. And once again, I don't know if you have any questions, but I really thank you for your generous
Well,
questions.
thank you. And I now propose that we take a 5-minute break. So if everybody could be back promptly at 10:10, then we will have further comments from neighbors, and then we will ask the town engineer to speak. And that's probably all we'll have time for this evening.
See where we are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good. Angela Jameson, it's 10:13 and we're resuming the public hearing. And Mr. Kavukian will be next to speak. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mike Kavukian. I live at 293 North Wilton Road. And I could try and amuse everyone by calling this my 2 cents, but actually what I'm referring to would be comments from many of the surrounding neighbors, specifically Lynn Davenport, my wife, Lynn and Alice Vaughn, Margaret Cooper, Ron Meckler and Jackie Shapiro, Genevieve and Ron Lehman, Steve and Lori Wyckoff, Mary Ellen and Eric Meyer, Trudy and Alan Goldberg, Teresa and Craig Bowling, Mike Conover, Steve and Miriam Sosnick, Hugh and Judy Wiley, and Rosemary and Dan McClue. We don't have the gravitas of the experts that have gone before us, but we do represent this represents the feelings of the immediate neighbors. I wanted to share just a little bit of history relating to the wetlands. I apologize for reading, but I think it'd be most efficient. A little bit of the wetlands west of the St. Luke's football field, which is discussed, because the wording of prior approvals places a very high bar of activities which are perceived to disrupt or disturb the wetlands. So a bit of history. In 2000, an application was put by St. Luke's for a field house, which was being submitted to inland wetlands. St. Luke's at the time had asked permission to take much of the runoff from the impervious surface, the building, the parking lot, the roadways, and have it diverted to a pond. They were going to make that work. They'd have to create a weir on the pond, which is the type of dam that would allow retaining some of the water during high flow states. Many of the neighbors were very concerned to make this work. They'd have to drain the pond about 18 to 24 inches for extra surge capacity. Because of our concern that this would adversely affect the wetlands, St. Luke's, or rather the commission, put very strong wording into their approval, and I will quote, "No excavation or disturbance shall take place in any wetlands west of the existing football field, now and forevermore." I've never seen any wording of that type, Kathleen. I'd love to know whether you feel that's unusual. It seems to be. More recently, in 2007, there was a minor educational project on the wetlands. The Environmental Commission in July of 2007 approved the application, but they did not walk away from the earlier forceful statement protecting the wetlands. And I'll quote again. They said, "No excavation or other disturbances shall take place in any wetlands west of the existing football field, now or forevermore." Moving forward to the proposal at hand, we'd like the town to keep in mind and maintain the very high bar in terms of not allowing anything to disturb the wetlands. We feel the encroachment of the wetland setback, which will involve at least 360 by 10 feet, consuming roughly 5,000 square feet of wetland setback, will disturb the wetlands. We feel the plan to remove trees from the wetland setback that buffers the wetlands from the parking complex, they can also do nothing but disturb the wetlands. A recent survey quantified larger trees and dismissed smaller trees. In reality, all the trees in the wetland, large and small, play an important role regulating temperatures and keeping temperatures in check. Cutting these trees will limit the benefit and disturb the wetland. Also, the trees, large and small, stabilize the very steep bank there. Study after study has shown that artificial turf creates a local microcosm of temperatures 15 to 20 degrees in excess of natural fields. These elevated temperatures will immediately impact the wetlands and disturb native plant and animal life. The parking complex will also require fixed lighting, which will emanate into the wetlands. Add that to the literally hundreds of cars will pass in and out of there at night after some event, with headlights passing across the wetlands, clearly is going to disturb animal life in the wetlands. Artificial turf is not maintenance free. One of the challenges to keep artificial turf maintained is to clear it of debris from surrounding trees. This consists of fine seeds and leaves. This is now interestingly addressed by St. Luke's, which uses very ultra-powerful self-propelled blowers, and they go all across the field back and forth, and much of the discharge is into the wetlands. We've heard disturbing data today discussing crumb rubber, and we now know that that's probably much more toxic than what's coming off roadways, but that is what's being blown into the wetlands now without any approval. It's just routinely being done with no one blinking an eye. We're all on wells in the surrounding neighborhoods. We're concerned that rain percolating through the turf will carry contaminants into the wetlands, and even worse, the groundwater, and eventually, which is a very scary thought, our wells. Who's even monitoring that? We're told the state does not have regulations. I think the state is not one to look to for leadership. The state is often very behind on matters like this. No one talks about it, but they talk about the minimal amount of water coming off from the parking garage. There might be debris or rain blowing in 15 to 20 feet, but any parking garage that I've ever seen to be properly maintained, the maintenance crew constantly power washes the deck to eliminate the antifreeze, the motor oil, and whatever else is there. What's going to happen with that power washing runoff? It does not seem that systems that they propose are going to be adequate in terms of dealing with that. We would also like to have some assurance that any containment system will be scrupulously monitored. It seems what is being proposed is so technical, it's hard to imagine it can be systematically and routinely monitored in an effective way. So I'll close by repeating that we're concerned this proposal will disturb the wetlands in a number of ways. It will increase adjacent local temperatures by expanding the turf to the edge of the wetlands. St. Luke's should be looking at ways to minimize artificial turf. It will destabilize the existing steep bank. If someone's not seen it, it's worth taking a trip out there to see it by removing trees large and small. It will eliminate much of the critical wetlands buffer with the cantilevered football field. It will introduce new runoff into the wetlands and deep aquifers from the artificial turf, the parking garage, and the parking lot, which we've learned now will not be adequately filtered. It will cause significant light pollution, just emitting from nighttime light there to the sweep of LED headlights across the wetland. As someone presented earlier, they described the wetlands as about 10 acres. It is 10 acres. It's just a beautiful tract of land that's been protected. It just seems like a travesty to have a parking garage, something that should be probably in downtown New Canaan, up in that area. And then it will introduce particulate matter blowing in from the wetlands. We've learned that these fields require hundreds of pounds of new material. People wonder where it goes. I know where it goes. Some of it's on our feet. A lot of it just blown off by the maintenance equipment with no regulation of that. That should not be allowed. So we feel the proposal does not meet the high standards set in the 2000 wetlands approval and then reconfirmed in the 2007 wetlands approval, which states no excavation or other disturbances should take place in any wetlands west of the existing football fields now and forevermore. People are interested, I can provide copies of those statements later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Do the commission members have, or Inland Wetlands Director have any questions? No? No. Thank you very much. Are there any other neighbors on Zoom or here in the room who would like to speak?
I see no hands raised.
Okay, very good. So I would like to ask the town engineer, Maria Coplet, to come and talk to us about her view of the engineering that is involved here. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission, again, Maria Coplet, town engineer. The engineering department reviewed the revisions to the application for the Inland Wetlands Commission for St. Luke's Field 377 East Lake Inland. As part of our assessment, we evaluated the field on parking structure site permitting set and associated stormwater management report prepared by SMRT Architects and Engineers with latest revisions dated January 8, 2024 respectively. The latest revisions of these documents submitted by the applicant respond to a December 4th, 2023 comment memo prepared by the engineer. The revised drainage analysis as presented demonstrates general compliance with our town and maintaining drainage policy. The analysis models that post-developed conditions mimic pre-construction, which are currently disturbed conditions with an existing artificial turf field. Rainfall runoff from the proposed elevated replacement turf field, which is a roof for the at-grade parking lot, will be conveyed via roof drains and storm piping to a subsurface storage system sized to mitigate up to and including a 100-year storm event with peak volume and furthermore, the parking lot below the turf field roof will have catch basins to capture runoff from the cars that park there, along with potential wind-blown rain. These basins will discharge to a separate subsurface stormwater storage system once passing through an oil sand interceptor, which is good practice for parking lots. As the stormwater analysis models the surface runoff from the entire roof artificial field area, the secondary system collecting runoff at the at-grade parking level provides additional secondary storage. Water quality volume requirements have been modeled to be met by the oil sand interceptor and by the surface sample. Furthermore, no credit has been taken as part of the analysis for infiltration, given the depth of groundwater 2 feet below the stone bottom of the surface storage system, and that the outlet orifice of the outlet control structure is higher than the stone base of the system. It is anticipated that groundwater recharge volume will occur. As previously stated, engineering finds that the proposed drainage analysis to demonstrate satisfactory compliance with our town and maintaining drainage policy. While engineering has not been provided material specifications for the artificial turf infill mix for the proposed elevated field, the town has used virgin rubber in its turf applications, and we would recommend that the applicant consider the same or equal material for the new turf field as opposed to what's been quoted tonight as recycled rubber. But again, we have not seen those specifications, so the applicant could clarify that. The applicant should also provide the specifications for the existing turf field and their ongoing maintenance and replacement of that infill material, if available, to determine if the current reportedly deteriorating existing turf field is constructed with recycled material. I'm available for questions regarding the overall analysis as presented, but will defer to the design engineer of record for any of the specifics to this.
I meant to mention, Melissa Flynn, the design engineer, is on Zoom, just wasn't able to be here in person, so she's on the call.
Questions for our town engineer?
I just have a question. There was the initial presentation, 6th December, right? I believe, I think can you tell me, did you watch that meeting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I listened to it.
You listened to it. You listened to the meeting.
Yes.
And the supplemental information that came in from Melissa Smart in reply to the things that were raised, that's all been reviewed.
Right.
And were you satisfied with the answers that were provided
Yes.
from an engineering, just the engineering components?
Right.
Thank you.
So this is Angela Jameson for the record. I'd just like to make sure I understand and the items where you think there needs to be further clarification. I believe you said that in relation to that the applicant has not specified what kind of infill will be used on the new artificial
The
turf.
infill material, right.
Yes.
Tonight it was discussed that it would be from recycled rubber, but I actually haven't seen the specifications on that, so I think we would just need clarification. Like I mentioned, the town of New Canaan and its artificial turf applications uses
Virgin rubber, yeah. And you also said that you would like some clarification about the current artificial turf field and what infill is used there and how it's maintained.
Right, because the way that I'm viewing this application before us right now is almost like a retrofit. And so it would be a very different discussion if there wasn't a current artificial turf field in this exact location. So because of that, I'm viewing this as almost like a retrofit application. I think that it would be helpful to understand what the existing conditions are to further support the conclusion that the applicant is making that the post-construction conditions are going to be at or better than current conditions. And right now, they're doing a great job to demonstrate that, but I just would like to see that additional infill information.
Yes. And could I ask you, why would there be a different discussion if we were talking about an artificial turf field de novo?
No, what I'm referring to is what the info material is. So for example,
Okay.
if they currently are using virgin rubber and are ongoing maintenance with virgin rubber, but yet with the new design, they're proposing recycled crumb rubber, then there could be the perceived difference of contaminants or pollutants in it. But if they currently right now are using a recycled crumb rubber, and it's going to either recycled from rubber or an alternative info material that they haven't presented to us, then there could be a perceived improvement on the pollutants coming off of it.
Very good. And then turning to another subject, there's been a lot of discussion this evening about the Connecticut Deep Manual. Do you have a view on the extent to which there are requirements in there and whether they have, if there are, whether they have been adequately met?
Right. So it's meeting the intent of the manual for sure. And the design right now regarding the surface sand filter, sometimes you can get caught up in the terminology between some of the methodology in the manual. For example, a rain garden or bioretention area are used interchangeably, but they actually have two different cross sections with their soil regime, the engineered soil regime. So they're actually two separate measures. So I think that this is basically, we're getting caught up a little bit in the terminology, but when you look at the detail of what the applicant is providing for a water quality measure, what they are showing, essentially a surface sand filter, a linear surface sand filter, which I'm comfortable with the fact that they are increasing their impervious area at the crowd by about 1,000 square feet. What they are treating is close to 2,000 square feet. They're treating above and beyond the added impervious area. I feel confident that this area is addressing meeting the intent of both our policy and the Connecticut.
Thank you.
Yeah, Beth Sanford, I have a question for you. So the engineer today, Steve Drinkus, one of the main points that he made was that there was no filtration system and that the pollutants were going to leach into the wetlands.
So
How does that compare in terms of the standard that you say that this system is meeting?
So there's two issues. One is the sand filter, but that is treating the runoff from the lower level, which is a secondary, because essentially the play field is the roof.
Okay.
And it's the runoff from the roof that the manual and our policy that you're addressing. And the delta is essentially the same from existing conditions. But what we've asked the applicant is that, given the fact that there is going to be windborne rain that comes into perimeters of the garage, there's also obviously snow melt or runoff from the actual cars that come in as well, and the series of catch basins that would pick up that runoff, that we wanted a method to treat that area. The pollutant removals from those will be done by the oil sand interceptor. And then it'll go to a separate storage system prior to it discharging through a controlled orifice control, outlet control, into the wetland. Now, that secondary system and also the main system for the root, though they are not designed for infiltration, the separation between groundwater is sufficient, and the distance between the bottom of the measure, so the stone, and then the bottom of the actual units, is lower than the outlet control structure orifice elevation, which means that there's going to be water that infiltrates into the ground prior to it leaving. So the smaller storm events will stay in that system, and though it might be very slow, it will infiltrate over time. It won't be until your larger storm events that you'll hit an elevation high enough to hit the orifices in the weir and the outlet control structure to actually exit. So there will be added water quality in those subsurface systems, even though they're not taking, the applicant is not taking additional credit.
I have a follow-up question on this particular subject. There seemed to be testimony from previous individuals regarding the lack of soil data or test holes, if you will, or borings. Are you comfortable with the borings that have been done in the area of the stormwater systems in what you were just explaining,
Right.
you know,
So
groundwater?
this has been typical in the past with other applications that have come before us. And typically what happens is either we can have an opportunity for the applicant to come back post or pre-building permit issuance to verify some of those numbers, or even post-building permit application. We've done it both ways to verify those numbers, and they just need to provide the findings and the data to us. And a lot of times the reason why that happens is that there's not the opportunity nor the means to get into some of these areas to pull back the field to do the additional deep hole testing. And if at that point in time, probably would behoove them to do infiltration testing, even though it's in fill material, just to see, you know, what potential ability there would be to infiltrate into that process.
Thank you. Commission members on Zoom, any questions to the town engineer? Oh, please,
I
go
wanna
ahead.
go back to what you said earlier about it being a retrofit.
Right.
Because there's a field there now,
Correct.
you're evaluating this project differently than if there was no field and they were coming with the project, with the proposal to build a turf field and under a, you know, over a garage, right?
Correct.
Right. So, but isn't it to the town's benefit, to the wetlands, to think of how you can make it even better rather than having that be the benchmark that you're starting at because it's there? So if an alternative might be to even have a natural field and with some restriction of use of pesticides, and but not having it be impervious. I mean, that benchmark I think could be kind of a false benchmark in terms of maintaining our wetlands for the future.
And that I would respectfully say is actually for the commission to decide. For me and for engineering, our drainage policy, our drainage certification policy has been to meet existing conditions or improve existing conditions. The idea is that ultimately, incrementally over time, if as much as an applicant can improve, then you will ultimately your downstream infrastructure or receiving water bodies will reap the benefit, but we haven't, and this is the precedent that we've had in town, we haven't put onus on any applicant that they have to go above and beyond existing conditions unless there are known, like, for example, in a known flooding condition area, we've asked them to address those conditions, but it is definitely within your purview, should you determine that you would want anything different, but for engineering, we don't have that many things.
Any further questions from the commission? So it's now 10:38, so let's take stock of where we are and what still needs to happen. Certainly the applicant needs to have adequate time to present comments on what we have heard from the neighbors and opposition. And it would be my suggestion, Attorney Finn, that we would ask you to the applicant to consent to an extension of the public hearing and for you to provide those comments at our next inland wetland meeting in February, and that we would do that and then we would close the public hearing.
We are agreeable to that procedure. I do want to remind everyone, I'm not sure how it'll affect things, but we do have a Planning and Zoning Commission application for this project. And as you probably all know, Planning and Zoning cannot act on that application until they get a report from you or a decision from the Inland Wetlands Commission. I believe that we are scheduled to go back before Planning and Zoning, I believe, next Tuesday. I think that's January 30th. Obviously, we will not have a decision or a report from this commission by then. I think Planning and Zoning next meets in February 27th, which is the day after. And I am concerned about bumping up against time deadlines because we only get a certain amount of days to grant extension. So happy to agree to the extension. I think the plan to come back on the 26th is perfectly acceptable, but I did want to at least put that out there that we may have some issues with timing, and if you possibly can close the hearing on the 26th and issue a decision quickly, that might ameliorate these concerns about running out of extension days.
No, certainly hear that point, and I think that we will do everything that we can to meet that request.
With scheduling and whatnot, I don't know if you'll have an answer for this tonight, Attorney Finn, but do you envision additional materials being filed? And if you do, I think it would be, we have a holiday on February 19th, February 20th would be that Tuesday, but that doesn't give a whole lot of time for the commission to review things. So if additional items were to come in, I would shoot for 1, 2, 3, the week of February 12th, possibly.
Yes, I'm not exactly sure what form our response is going to take, but February 12th would be the beginning of the week. You mean sometime during that week?
Sometime during that week. This way, I could get it posted, get it to the commission members. Our meeting in February is a week later due to the holiday, so I don't want to go too close to that.
Understood. Okay.
Very good. So if there's nothing further for this evening on this item, we will, do I need a motion to adjourn?
We have a few other items.
No, I know, to
Oh, yeah.
adjourn the public
Just
hearing.
adjourn. Yep, adjourn.
So with that, we will adjourn the public hearing. It's not closed, and we will get back to this at our next meeting. And thank you, everyone who's attended and for your patience over the evening. So for the commission members, we still have some items. So the next item is the agent's report. Kathleen, over to you.
Let's see, where are we? So there were two wetland applications that have gone through the process and they're listed there on your form there. Both of which were administratively approved and really nothing. One has to go on further to a special permit with planning and zoning, which is, I think, next week. If you have any questions on those items, I'm happy to answer them.
Anybody have any questions?
Seems very straightforward.
Yeah.
Yep.
The last item, I just wanted to mention the town of New Canaan, in your town email accounts, you're receiving not only emails from me, you are receiving some emails from the IT department, and there's a new program that they're asking all commission members to do. It's called Know Before. So this one happens to be on cybersecurity. I believe some of you have already taken it. So you have to take that. It's about 15 minutes. Maria and I did it already, right? Maria, you done it? Twice. Oh, yeah. We're very secure.
They want you to do it by the end of January too.
Oh, yeah, it's coming. Your deadline is fast approaching. If anyone's having trouble with their email accounts, please let me know and I'll
So
try to
I'm
get you
sorry,
sorted out.
everyone should do that? or-
Everyone,
Oh,
every commission member. Yeah,
okay,
including staff.
right.
So it went, you have it in your inbox. Did you see?
No, I have to. I have
Oh,
to get
okay,
it
that's
done.
right. You're still working on yours. Right, sorry.
I
But
took it
Beth,
today.
Beth, you're good, right? You had no issues? Okay, good.
Oh, so that would be no B4. I thought that was like a
Spam.
spam.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. It's not spam. It's real.
3 emails from.
It's real.
Okay,
Yeah.
that is real and
Yeah.
it's safe.
Sorry
Okay,
about
very
that. That's
good.
why I wanted to mention it. And then,
Couple things.
the only other thing I wanted to mention is, there was a program, Freedom of Information Act. Maybe some of you attended in person, I'm not certain.
Oh, no, I was
Um,
on Zoom.
But over Zoom.
Yeah.
But if you missed the meeting, it is on the town website. I would watch was it now? 2 hours?
Oh, it was long.
Oh,
I went about 2 hours of it.
you were here, Maria, for that?
Wasn't as long as tonight.
It wasn't as long.
Wasn't as long as tonight. But anyway,
Thank you.
I just want to get that word out there on that program too.
Scary stuff, actually.
Yeah. So. And that is all. I have.
Okay, so could I hear a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, seconded by Beth Sanford. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And thank you very much, everyone.
Good night, George and Dan.
Good night, everyone.